Good morning, 9 o'clock. Welcome back. We have some big developing news this morning.
Yes, we do. In case you haven't heard, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has been chosen to be Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate and running mate. Not official yet, but that's the word that we are getting from many sources. And we're going to continue our coverage this morning with analysis from Hamlet University political science professor David Schultz.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for having me again.
Well, let's talk about, I know we've been for the last hour discussing this, but for people maybe just tuning in, what does this mean for Minnesota?
What it means for Minnesota is a few different things. First off, of course, it puts Minnesota on the map again. You know, for many people on the two coasts, we're flyover zone. Suddenly, everybody's going to be interested in Minnesota and the Minnesota governor. But internally to politics, what this means is a couple of possibilities here. One is assuming that Harris does win and Walz is the VP. He resigns as governor probably at the end of the year. This means Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan goes up to become governor. Bobby Joe Champion, who is the president of the Senate, goes up to become lieutenant governor. And it has a cascading effect in terms of what it means for other positions. But if that were to happen, we would have the first female governor, first Native American governor in Minnesota, and we would have the first African-American lieutenant governor in Minnesota. So a lot of, let's say, again, cascading or domino effects internally in Minnesota politics.
Let's talk about this pick. We knew pretty much at the start of the day it was likely going to be Walz or Shapiro. Those were the two top finalists. The final two is what we were hearing from sources all across the board. What do you think changed? Why do you think Walz tipped the scales, if you will? Why do you think he was picked over Shapiro out of Pennsylvania?
Okay, I think a couple of possibilities. One, I'll first say that he's been a very good, that is Walz, a very good defender of Democratic Party values and a very good in terms of criticizing the Trump administration and, let's say, the Republicans. I think it's first. Second, I always say that the first factor in terms of picking a vice president is do no harm. And there were some people who said that Shapiro's stance on Israel, some will even go as far as saying because he was Jewish, also hurt him in terms of possibilities. But at the end of the day, I think for Walz, he represents a lot of what the progressives in the Democratic Party want to do. You know, his positions on abortion, LGBTQ issues, the spending for educational funding, for a whole host of issues, voting rights, I think is important. And what this signals to me is that Harris is going to run a campaign from the progressive left at this point, is that she was not going with a more moderate Shapiro, a more moderate Kelly from Arizona, but is going to run really a progressive ticket and set up a clear contrast between the Trump-Vance ticket. So this is a pretty significant direction for Harris to be going for Walz. And also, given the fact that he's a relative unknown across the country at this point, I think one of the challenges is going to be to ask how well does Walz introduce himself and can he help deliver some additional votes that Harris will need in those critical swing states to be able to win the election.
You were saying that he kind of checked the box, do no harm. There wasn't enough negative stuff out there about him.
Correct.
But we can probably guess that the GOP is going to go on the offense. The first, right out of the gate, will probably be the civil unrest following George Floyd. You know, the visuals, the video. Is that where you think that their first attack is going to go?
I think it's exactly where it's going to be because you're right. We have an awful lot of video out there that they can show that's very graphic and very compelling. So I think that's going to be the first issue, and then the second is going to be on his liberalism at this point and him being a progressive, liberal candidate. And this is going to be an issue because the 6 swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they're clearly more conservative than the state of Minnesota, and partly why they're swing states is because of their real sort of centrist stance. And the question becomes now, by picking Walz, is she hoping to more mobilize progressive voters, or does she go after more centrist voters? And the pick of Walz suggests that maybe less of going after those centrist swing voters. This is a pretty big gamble in terms of where she's going here. And obviously, of course, we won't know till November 5th, Election Day, whether the gamble is worthwhile.
Kind of a shift on what some people thought she would do and what her campaign would do. You mentioned the do no harm, but also in the past, oftentimes the VP candidate has also kind of been the one who could maybe go a little further, could say some things that the initial candidate, the presidential candidate, couldn't say. How do you see Walz and Vance when it comes to head with the VP candidates?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, first off, I think Trump is pretty aggressive in terms of his rhetoric at this point. Harris is trying to run an upbeat, positive campaign. I think she will leave it up to Walz to take on the Republicans in harsher language. I still don't think you're going to see it in terms of as harsh as you might see coming from the other side for the Republicans. J.D. Vance was picked, I think, in part because Trump is also appealing to what? The base. I mean, it's what's interesting about this election here. Trump and Vance, Harris and Walz, this is all about what we're going to call mobilizing the base politics. They're not really going after too many of the swing voters at this point, however few there are. They're really aiming and saying, get the base excited, mobilize them heavily, and hope that wins the election. And in the process, if there are some swing voters out there, either hope they vote for you or they don't vote whatsoever. So in some sense, both campaigns are playing base politics.
Yeah, Walz has been, at least nationally, his name has been thrown out there a lot recently, and kind of for his folksy style, the fact that he's able to be more direct, and we know that the term weird he has been using, and maybe he is appealing to a base that is uncertain as far as on the right, that kind of throwing out some of those terms that maybe we're not seeing from Kamala Harris, who's taking a different stance as far as the way she's communicating the message.
I think you're right. But again, given how polarized we are in this country, Walz is not going to bring over people from the right at this point. Now, maybe 6 years ago, in a different era, when Walz first ran for governor, you remember he ran under the banner of One Minnesota, tried to talk about campaigning across the aisles, working across the aisles. He's long since abandoned that approach and has really become sort of, changed into a partisan, liberal Democrat. But we're in a state in American politics where, again, there are so few undecided voters. As I keep pointing out to people, this election is going to come down to about 150,000 to 200,000 swing voters in about 5 or 6 swing states. That's how few people are going to really decide what happens in the Electoral College to get elected, to President of the United States. Walz may or may not be able to move some of those few 150,000 voters, but certainly no candidate is going to move somebody on the far right or far left just simply because of the polarization that we have.
Sure. David Schultz, thank you so much. Thanks for letting us pick your brain on this very busy Tuesday morning. We thank you.
My
We want to continue this now. We want to go live to Washington. Obviously, Doug Luzader standing by talking about this big news, political news, not only here locally, Doug. Obviously, we've got a lot invested here coming from Minnesota, but just big picture. First and foremost, what are you hearing? What are people saying there in D.C.?
Well, as you know, it's not exactly a shock. I think it would have been more surprising a few days ago, but it does seem as though Governor Walz's stock was really kind of rising on this short list. He's been mentioned, again, as you know, for some time as a potential VP candidate, but kind of farther down on that short list. And then yesterday, all of a sudden, talk really turned to this race narrowing down to him and Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, both of whom brought different potential strengths to the ticket. But, there was also a lot of talk about personal rapport, that the Governor Walz may have just kind of struck things off better with Kamala Harris. And there was this, one-on-one interview over the course of the weekend. And ultimately, this decision was made pretty late in the game, but it sounds like we will see the two of them together on stage in Pennsylvania later. And that's a little bit awkward because, of course, they're going to be appearing in Pennsylvania, the state where Governor Shapiro is from. But they will be on stage together in Philadelphia later this afternoon.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the awkwardness, if that will be awkward or not, being that it seemed like Pennsylvania Governor Shapiro was the presumptive pick. What do you think changed from your aspect? Of course, we're very, state-centric here, Minnesota-focused. But what on your hand are you hearing about? Maybe what shifted? Maybe why it went to Governor Walz and not Shapiro?
Well, it may have, again, come down to personal rapport, which is not to say that Governor Walz doesn't bring things to the table here. I mean, I think there is some concern at the Harris campaign about some weakness in the upper Midwest, and this really kind of stems to Hillary Clinton losing in Wisconsin. That there is no doubt a feeling that Governor Walz can speak effectively to voters from not just Minnesota, but also Wisconsin and on into Michigan. On the other hand, not to sell Governor Shapiro short, he was seen as someone that could bring some ideological balance to the ticket, seen as more of a moderate than perhaps Governor Walz is, that would help balance things out with Kamala Harris, who is seen as more of a progressive. And the fact that Pennsylvania is a critically important swing state. And that no doubt made this decision pretty difficult because Shapiro would have helped Democrats clinch Pennsylvania. It certainly wouldn't be a guarantee, but it would have been another little point in their column going after a state that this entire election could ultimately revolve around.
Doug, with now presumably both tickets set in stone with less than 100 days to go until the election, where does this leave mainly kind of those independents, the undecided? We've talked about this with you before. If the far left are going to go with the far left, the far right are going to go with the far right. Where does this stand now for the independents, the undecided, those who aren't super jazzed about maybe either candidate? Where do you think this falls for them?
Well, that's where this is kind of an interesting choice. I think if you were making a play for independents, that's where things kind of tilt toward Governor Shapiro, who again is seen as more of a moderate, perhaps helping win over skeptical Republicans and middle-of-the-road Democrats who might be open to arguments from former President Trump. This is definitely a play to the base, which is not to say that it's not a smart move. But you need the base, obviously, to get elected. You need a lot of excitement. You need folks to show up at the polls. And Governor Walz may help Democrats in that effort to really kind of generate enthusiasm within the party. But reaching out to those middle-of-the-road voters, to independent and undecided voters, is always the critical issue for both campaigns. And both of them may really be challenged in that regard.
How do you think that Trump and Vance will be approaching this? How do you see their response to the pick here with Governor Walz?
Well, we've already seen them release a statement about this, saying that Governor Walz has been trying to turn Minnesota into California, saying this is kind of doubling down on a very progressive ticket. So that appears to be their line of attack. They have no doubt been seeing Governor Walz rising on the short list as well as anyone. So I can't imagine this really came as a surprise for them. And no doubt they've been kind of loaded and ready to make these attacks on Governor Walz. And we're going to see that play out fast and furious, no doubt. It's going to be an interesting question now as to whether there's going to be a VP debate. Originally, when there were negotiations between the Trump campaign and the then Biden campaign, there was provision for a single VP debate. We don't know at this point whether we're going to see a Walz-Vance matchup. It's certainly a possibility, but nothing's set in stone at this point.
Sure. Doug Luzader for us from D.C. Thank you so much for joining us here on this busy Tuesday morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, the newsroom is quite an exciting place to be right now. Sleeves rolled up, people on phone calls. We haven't seen this for some time, so of course this is a big news story that we're going to continue to follow here. We're going to throw out a good day, the format today, for obviously a big story.
Yeah, we are going to take a quick break, though. We will be right back. Stay with us. You're watching Fox 9 and Fox Local on this very much of a busy Tuesday morning.
It is 9:17 right now. Welcome back to Good Day. We are in breaking news mode this morning. Of course, Vice President Kamala Harris has chosen Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. That is the news reports we're hearing. Fox 9's Paul Bloom joined us live in the newsroom with more.
Good morning, Paul.
Yeah, good morning, Kelly. Alex, I heard you before the commercial break just how exciting a time it is in the newsroom in this selection of Governor Walz. Of course, we're all trying to reach out to our contacts. Just heard from former mayor, Minneapolis Mayor R.T. Ryback. And the others, and you know, in terms of perspective from my vantage, I remember covering Governor Walz in 2018 in the build-up to the gubernatorial election. Of course, he would go on to defeat Hennepin County Commissioner Jeff Johnson at that time. And as a reporter who was at the DFL party that night where he won, you might recall his theme of One America, the flannel red and black shirts and jackets, campaigning across the state. I had the chance. I think I was the very first reporter to grab him. They had just announced Governor Walz, Tim Walz, at the time obviously a U.S. House of Representative for about a decade down in the Mankato area, and he had come campaigned positive message throughout, the folksy look, the flannel, campaigning across Minnesota, and he had won. And we just thought it was a neat moment at this time where he's about to be unveiled to the rest of the country, if you will, to take a look back at my exchange with him, 2018. Tim Walz at the time, Representative Tim Walz, learning he had just become the state's governor.
Mr. Governor-elect, how does that sound?
I'll tell you what, we're trying to let it all soak in, but what I've been saying is when we ran a campaign based on a positive message, one Minnesota where we come together rather than divide, that sounds pretty good.
And you're ready to reach across that aisle tomorrow?
Ready to go. I think you heard it up there. I think it's very important in a night like this, sending a message to our business leaders, sending a message to folks who may not agree with us. I need to be the governor for them, too. I need to listen to what they have to say. Bring them in.
And obviously that is 6 years ago. You wonder what kind of message he takes to the national stage. Of course, this is a partisan situation here. The choice of vice president will be scrutinized all across the country. Again, in our backyard from the DFL today, a day to celebrate this from DFL chairman Ken Martin. The entire country is about to see why their friends from Minnesota cannot stop bragging about Governor Walz by picking a servant leader. Born and raised in a small town, of course, down there in Nebraska, who's dedicated his career to protecting freedoms and lifting up working families. Vice President Harris has chosen the perfect foil for J.D. Vance and his politics of resentment. Under Governor Walz's leadership, Minnesota has built a model for how Democrats across the nation can both win elections and improve people's lives. We could not be more excited to help bring the Minnesota magic to this campaign and to put Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in the White House. Obviously still an election to win there for Governor Walz, now Vice President. The choice of Kamala Harris, but it's certainly a big day locally just in terms of a political figure from humble roots, school teacher, football coach, U.S. House of Representative, member of the U.S. House, of course, his Army service in the National Guard, and now to VP choice on the National Democratic ticket. Alex, Alex. And,
yeah.
We'll send it back into the newsroom to the both of you now.
Sure.
And of course, being a teacher and educator is a big part of his background as well. So we'll be hearing more about what he's going to be doing on that front. Thank you, Paul. You certainly had plenty of time to follow him around over the years.
Appreciate it, Paul. We want to get now to Bill Keller. He's live in St. Paul outside the governor's residence. Of course, been an activity hub in the last couple of hours. It was a little slow this morning, but obviously it's definitely picked up. Bill, I assume obviously that's some media, but also just residents there, people in the neighborhood behind you?
Yeah, you know, when I showed up here about 4 hours ago, it was about 4:30 in the morning, and it was me and a producer from another media outlet just kind of staking out. You almost have to ask yourself, am I at the right location? Yeah, I think we figured out the right spot of where Governor Walz is hanging out this morning. It's been a very busy morning in just the last hour and a half since news broke that he is expected to be the vice presidential running mate for Kamala Harris. It's been a lot of folks just coming by, taking selfies, kind of trying to be a part of this moment that has a really nice energy. The weather is ideal for this. People just walking by and kind of smiling to themselves that their governor is now going to be on a national stage. In fact, I spoke with one woman who literally just got the news when I broke it to her. Hey, good morning. Did you guys hear the news?
We did. I just heard. I laughed out loud.
You laughed out loud.
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, I'm excited. I hate to lose a wonderful governor, but I love Peggy Flanagan. I'm in early childhood education, and she's a strong advocate, as Walz has been. I'm excited for the country. I'm excited about Harris. I've been excited since I heard the news about that. So I'm thrilled for Minnesota to be represented on the ticket, and we will figure this out, and we're going to be strong supporters of the Walz and Harris ticket. So
what do you think he brings to her ticket?
Well, I think he's very practical. I think he's been a clear advocate for everyday people, and people know that. He's a teacher. He comes from not the urban areas. He has a more rural greater Minnesota background, and I think just the way he talks about things, it makes common sense to people. He doesn't try to use political language. He just tries to get the work done, and I think that's going to be valuable. Even though we're not a swing state, I think he's going to speak to swing state voters because of how he approaches getting things done.
And that was one of the same thoughts I got from another resident who said, you know, you pick your vice presidential candidate because you want somebody that's going to appeal to the largest number of voters to strengthen your ticket and hopefully pick up some wins in those swing states. But he said the bottom line is he likes the way that Governor Walz has governed, not just here to try and get votes, but actually help in their, not just the campaign, but in a potential for her time in office. Back to you guys.
Okay.
All right, Bill Keller for us there live in St. Paul. Obviously, a lot of people trying to get a picture, maybe trying to get a glimpse. At this point, we should just, again, kind of step back here. At this point, nothing has come out of the Harris campaign. Right. They said that they would make the announcement in some form soon. That has not come down. We haven't heard anything specifically from Walz's folks and their campaign, but multiple reports are indicating that it is Walz and that they will join together for the first time tonight, later today in Philadelphia, for their very first rally as the ticket for the Democratic side.
Yes. So it's been reported, Associated Press, us, and a number of other news outlets, but we'll be talking about this, of course, all morning long and talking to pundits and reporters who've been following him, and we'll continue that conversation. And we're going to head to a quick break right now, and we'll be right back.
Well, welcome back. It is 9:28. You are watching Fox 9 and Fox Local. Continuing breaking news right now. We are just getting word from Kamala Harris, VP Kamala Harris, posting, quote, "I am proud to announce that I have asked Tim Walz to be my running mate as a governor, a coach, a teacher, and a veteran. He delivered for working families like his. It is great to have him on the team. Now let's get to work." This coming from Vice President Kamala Harris officially. There were rumors. There was reported. It is now official that Governor Tim Walz, Minnesota governor, picked as the running mate for the Harris campaign.
Now, all morning long, Bill Keller has been live in St. Paul outside of Governor Walz's home. Throughout the morning, we know that you've seen just a whole bunch of cars and official type of, cars coming to his home, and people. You interviewed a woman and a couple women who had their thoughts about Governor Walz. Have you seen anyone else? I know it's early yet after the announcement, but has anyone else shown up that maybe protesters, or is it for the most part just at this point news people and a few others?
I think it's a very supportive crowd, Alex. Everybody who's been out here, now you hear the helicopters overhead. I'm surprised they don't have this as a temporary flight restriction now, but the news is here. The neighbors are here. We knew the first hint that something might be going on about 7 o'clock this morning. I tweeted out a photo. Behind that fence were about a dozen black SUVs. They look like Secret Service, but I believe these are just State Patrol or private, I should say, security vehicles, some sedans. Since the unofficial announcement at about 8 o'clock, we've seen more vehicles come in, private vehicles, a couple of Subarus, a couple of SUVs. These are presumably family friends and people who are here to support and celebrate and possibly get some campaign business taken care of before he eventually he gets in one of those vehicles and then has to depart for an airport because he's got a rally with Kamala Harris coming up in Philadelphia later this afternoon.
All right, Bill Keller Force there in St. Paul. Thank you. At the temporary residence of the governor, obviously the summit location in St. Paul, closed for renovations. This right off of the River Road. We do want to obviously reference the Trump-Vance campaign coming out even before it was officially official, putting out this statement in regards to Governor Tim Walz getting the pick. Quote, "It is no surprise that San Francisco liberal Kamala Harris wants West Coast wannabe Tim Walz as her running mate. Walz has spent his governorship trying to reshape Minnesota into the image of the Golden State. He says he pretends to support Americans in the heartland when the cameras are off. He believes that rural America is mostly cows and rocks." So that is part of the statement coming from the Trump-Vance campaign. We know things are just starting with less than 100 days to go until the election day.
We have had numerous interviews still yet to come, so we're going to take another quick break, and we will be back in just a few minutes. Stay with us here on Fox 9. 9:33 right now. Welcome back to this breaking news edition of Fox 9 Good Day. Vice President Kamala Harris just announced Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. It is official now.
Rob Olson has been tracking this and looking at reaction from here at home, but also across the country. Rob, what are you seeing at this point?
Well, obviously, if you go on Twitter, now called X, you're seeing a lot of different reaction. There's a lot of it that we're sorting through. Some of it is, this has turned into a spot where there's a whole lot of flame throwing that goes on there. But what we can show you now is the Minnesota Democrats who are celebrating Tim Walz's choice as the vice presidential running mate for Kamala Harris. Senator Tina Smith reacting on social media, and this is truly in a Tina Smith kind of way. A picture of her and Governor Walz with donuts saying, "Donut count Minnesota out." Congratulations, Governor Walz. And for anyone that's been around Senator Smith, who was his former lieutenant governor, this is exactly in her vein of humor. Congresswoman Betty McCollum, longtime Democrat from St. Paul, longtime in Congress, says Tim is a rock, solid Democrat, a teacher, football coach, a veteran, and a leader who will defend our freedoms and will work to improve the lives of all Americans in every corner of our country. Representative Ilhan Omar saying congratulations to our next vice president. Our North Star state governor has signed universal school meals, paid family and sick leave, marijuana legalization, and protections for reproductive rights into law. Bring Minnesota nice to the ticket. And finally here, Congressman Dean Phillips, who briefly ran a bid to challenge Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries before dropping out, but really is seen as one of the earliest people to raise concern about whether Joe Biden should be running again or whether he should stay in the race. He expressed his support in several tweets today. This one was funny. Tim Walz can fix a lawnmower, fire a cannon, and fiercely protect women's freedoms all in one day. So you're seeing some of that mix of humor. And again, so what we've got here initially on the outset here, these are fellow Democrats that are already basically putting out their congratulatory messages. We're filtering through some of the other ones out there, and there's a lot of stuff that you have to be careful about what you can show. It's full of inflammatory language, people coming from the opposite side of the spectrum from Governor Walz, but we'll continue to kind of sort through this and see. But as you mentioned, Kamala Harris just finally posting on social media the official announcement that she is naming him as her VP candidate here. There's a lot of talk in the last few days about how there's really preparing a welcome video that was going to be used to break the news if the news didn't break before they could do that. We'll see if that video, that reported video that was supposed to be an announcement in the video being posted, if that still comes out or not. But of course, a lot of cameras going to be on him later today here as he makes his first appearance with Kamala Harris later this afternoon. Back to you guys.
That's right. People are going to be learning a lot about Minnesota as well. Another person weighing in, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, says, "I can't wait for the rest of the country to get to know Tim Walz. Cheers to a ticket that is going to energize people all across the nation."
And of course, we just got that official announcement from Harris, and now Walz himself making it official. He just posted on X, "It is an honor of a lifetime," I'm quoting him, "to join Kamala Harris in the campaign. I am all in." Vice President Harris showing us the politics of what is possible. He says, "It reminds me a bit of the first day of school." Coming from the former teacher there, goes on to say, let's get this done. Again, we are continuing to follow this developing situation. Earlier this morning, we spoke with U of M political professor Catherine Pearson to get her take on what happens now and what this all means. We knew he was, all indication, he was kind of in the final two. We knew the pick was going to come down sometime today. Just your first thoughts hearing that it is Walz?
I mean, this is tremendous news. 2 weeks ago, when Vice President Harris became the presumptive nominee when President Joe Biden stepped aside of running for office, he was on the long list. You know, there was a lot of speculation that he would be in the mix as a Democratic governor from a Midwestern state, having served in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing a rural background, bringing demographic diversity, a totally different background and life experience. So he's always been in the mix. But as he's interviewed for the position, essentially by going on national television, sort of interview after interview, it's become clear that he got down to the finals. And as of this morning, he had a 50-50 chance, and now it is Walz. And so it's really tremendous for Minnesota, and obviously very exciting for Walz and Democrats in Minnesota.
Now, is always the case in these is they look for balance in a ticket, and so you kind of thought that, okay, we've got a Californian, maybe they would look to balance it. That's where Mark Kelly got a lot of attention. Here's somebody from a southern border state, battleground state, or you had Kentucky. You had Michigan, a battleground state, and that's where Walz initially was seen maybe a little bit lower on the short list. What do you think changed it?
Well, that's right, because Minnesota leans Democratic. It's still a competitive state, but it's not considered one of those key swing states in the way that Pennsylvania is, where Governor Josh Shapiro serves, or the way that Arizona is, where Senator Mark Kelly serves. But electoral considerations certainly matter, and I think it is likely that the Harris campaign is thinking that electorally he will both, make the Democratic base happy, but yet also appeal to some rural voters who may have defected from Democrats in the past, given his background, his experience coming from Mankato as a high school social studies teacher in the Army National Guard. But it is also the case that candidates are looking for partners in governing. And so I think that's where the interview process really comes in. And that's also where Walz's experience, both as a Democratic governor in his second term and as a member of the U.S. House for 12 years, really comes into play as well. So obviously the electoral calculations are huge, but it's also about looking for a partner in governing.
You mentioned his experience. With that comes, obviously, a track record. And the Harris campaign will use that to their advantage, highlighting what they think are perks. The GOP will use that as what they think are negatives towards Walz. I asked the same question to you. What do you think will play on both sides?
That's right. Well, Democrats will certainly point to a very successful session with the DFL trifecta. Governor Walz signed a lot of Democratic priorities into law, and so that will certainly be something that Democrats campaign on. On the other hand, Republicans will point to the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, sort of Minneapolis burning, and also point to Governor Walz's more liberal record as governor compared to his record in the House of Representatives. So, with any choice, there's going to be a long record that comes with positives and negatives. And I think that, the entire country will learn more about both those things in the days and weeks to come.
When you compare him to the other finalists on that list, do you think his list of negatives was potentially shorter than some of those other candidates, that they had more, problem areas in their records?
I do, because in addition to looking for a partner in governing and someone who's electorally appealing, there is a rule, do no harm. And so I do think that, for Democrats, the positives of Governor Walz, greatly outweigh any negatives. I mean, any candidate is going to have, things that are going to be used against him, but relative to the other candidates who were vetted, I think that Walz's list of negatives is shorter. And then he also brings, I think, an energy to the ticket that it's likely that the Harris campaign found appealing.
All right, Catherine, let's talk about Minnesota specifically. So now that he is on the ticket for the Harris campaign, what does that mean for the governor role?
Well, if he becomes vice president, it means that Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan will become governor. That is stipulated by law. And then at that point, the president of the Senate, Bobby Joe Champion, also a DFLer, would become the lieutenant governor, and then his seat would be vacant.
During the campaigning, though, he would still remain governor?
Yes. During the campaign, he would still be governor.
And then what do you see this meaning for Minnesota in terms of, does this make this more of a campaign stop, or is it irrelevant that the running mate is from this state and they're going to focus on other parts of the country?
They're going to focus on the key swing states. I think it was always likely that Minnesota may get a visit or two from both sides during the campaign. But again, Minnesota is a state that is competitive but leans Democratic. And so just looking at the campaign schedule for this week, both of the Harris campaign and the Trump campaign, with J.D. Vance sort of following them around, it's pretty clear that they're focusing on those key swing states, including Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia.
Do you think that this changes anything with some of those key states? Does that go one way or the other? Is there one state that you think now will turn blue or turn red because Walz is named?
I mean, I think definitely the proximity to Wisconsin and Michigan will be helpful. But I see this more as sort of an electoral choice to energize the ticket and, not necessarily bring in any particular state, although I think it will be helpful in the upper Midwest, certainly.
How do you think of then Walz matching up with J.D. Vance? Presumably there typically is a debate between the vice presidential candidates here. And how do you see that matchup playing out?
I think it is fascinating because I think that both candidates will offer very different sort of visions of what they got out of their rural experiences growing up. Walz is from Nebraska, then of course came from Mankato, represented Minnesota's 1st district, was in the Army National Guard, a social studies teacher. And so I think that contrast with J.D. Vance, who of course is also from rural America, wrote Hillbilly Elegy, went on to Yale, Silicon Valley, and then of course the U.S. Senate. I think that they have obviously contrasting policy views, but will both draw upon their rural backgrounds in some very distinct ways during the campaign.
It'll be interesting to watch for sure, and it's just getting started.
All right. Well, we are getting some reaction. There's, of course, a lot on Twitter currently, formerly Twitter, now X. A few responses that we'll share with you. This one from Kamala Harris herself on Twitter saying, "I am proud to announce that I've asked Tim Walz to be my running mate. As a governor, a coach, a teacher, and a veteran, he's delivered for working families. It's great to have him on the team."
That officially coming down from the Harris campaign. Of course, the GOP, there's the response right there from the Harris campaign and Kamala Harris herself. The GOP wasting no time also commenting about this pick. This is coming from the Trump-Vance campaign saying, quote, "It is no surprise that San Francisco liberal Kamala Harris wants West Coast wannabe Tim Walz as her running mate. Walz has spent his governorship trying to reshape Minnesota in the image of the Golden State. While Walz pretends to support Americans in the heartland, when the cameras are off, he believes that rural America is mostly cows and rocks. From his proposing his own carbon-free agenda to suggesting stricter emission standards for gas-powered cars and embracing policies to allow convicted felons to vote, Walz is obsessed with spreading California's dangerously liberal agenda far and wide. If Walz won't tell voters the truth, we will. Just like Kamala Harris, Tim Walz is a dangerously liberal extremist, and the Harris-Walz California dream is every American's nightmare." Again, this coming from the Trump-Vance campaign.
All right, moving on now to another one, and this one is coming from Tim Walz, Governor Walz, also just posting on X saying, "It is an honor of a lifetime to join Kamala Harris on this campaign. I'm all in." Vice President Harris showing us the politics of what's possible. And it reminds me a bit of the first day of school. As you said, that was something that he shared, and it's being talked about, and a lot of other people weighing in this morning. Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, says he's an exceptionally effective governor and also great to work with. "I'm excited to work with his Midwestern voice," and he goes on to give a lot of other attributes of Governor Walz.
We are just getting started here following this breaking news, both here locally and nationally. Stay with us. You're watching Fox 9 and Fox Local. We'll be right back.
Welcome back, 9:50. Thanks for joining us. Of course, the big news this morning is our governor has been chosen to be the running mate of Kamala Harris. And we've been picking brains of a lot of people this morning. And joining us right now by phone is Melissa Hortman. She is Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives. Thanks for joining us.
Well, good morning.
Well, first off, Representative Hortman, what was your initial and what is your initial reaction of this news? And does this surprise you?
I'm really happy. So I'd say my initial reaction was just joyful. I'm not surprised. When you looked at the pool, it seemed that Governor Walz was in a very good position relative to the other candidates. I think it's hard for the vice president to pick a U.S. senator at this point. And then when you look at what Tim Walz has accomplished as governor and the kind of person that he is, it's just a great fit for her.
As far as, kind of putting Minnesota on the map, if you will, you hear that term getting thrown around a lot. How do you think this will play come the election and obviously the election cycle and the campaigning as we are now less than 100 days to go until November?
What I think people will like the most about Tim Walz on the national stage is that he's a happy and upbeat person, and he sees the best in people and situations. And I think people prefer a positive, upbeat approach, people who smile and laugh leading them, as opposed to people who are kind of snarky and kind of dark.
So that mentioning his positive approach is appealing. What is it, you know him personally. Is there something about him that maybe people don't know or will learn in the coming months about him that may surprise people out there who are just getting to know Governor Walz?
Well, I think that the dad memes have captured it really well. He does have that dad energy of like, hey, we're in this together. Let's get the job done. You can do it. We can do it. But also, like, this is serious work, and we're going to do this work together. We take our work seriously. The work that we have to do for Minnesotans is important. They're always front and center in the things that we're thinking about doing. And how will the policies that we're talking about change ordinary people's lives on a day-to-day basis, both short-term and long-term? So he's got that dad attitude and that dad pragmatic leadership.
I know this is still so early in the political game, if you will, only less than 2 hours since it's officially come out here. But what are you hearing as to how this looks going forward? We understand, obviously, he can remain as governor if he decides to do that. He could potentially resign, if you will, to focus primarily on the political presidential campaign. But what are you hearing? And kind of walk us through what this would look like.
Well, I think that first we have to win the election. And so I try not to get into the future dominoes game. Sometimes I have people who say, well, if you guys hold the House, who will be chair of this or that? It's the same game where I just say, look, we are focused on winning. And right now I'm focused on making sure that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz win the state of Minnesota, that they get more votes than the opponents, and that they help get Amy Klobuchar reelected and return a Democratic House to the Minnesota House of Representatives. So after the election, we can certainly deal with all those what ifs, and we'll probably know more then. But I think for the near term, we just focus on getting out on the campaign trail and talking to people about why Tim Walz is a great guy and a great leader.
We're taking a live look right now above, of course, the governor's mansion. As you can probably guess, a lot of media have planted themselves and will be there for many days. Are you, what do you think about Minnesota as a state getting this kind of national attention?
It's really exciting because we had such an incredible legislative session of achievement in 2023. We in the legislature referred to it as our LFG session. We got a lot done, things that people have been working on for 20 years, paid family medical leave, the school lunches and the breakfast for the kids, and the list goes on, right? Protecting reproductive freedom and so much more. And so when you look at the record of what he accomplished, what we accomplished in Minnesota, it's great that the national stage is looking at it. We certainly got a lot of positive press at the end of the 2023 budget session. And I think that the positive accolades for the governor are well-deserved.
Representative Hortman, again, appreciate your time here this morning. Already, with, again, just this coming down in the last 2 hours or so, you're going to look at the pros and the cons. Every party will. The Republican side will come at it. The Democratic side will come at it. We're already seeing just all across the board, Minneapolis is trending, Minnesota is trending, and with that, I'd like to get your take. A lot of people are bringing up, obviously, George Floyd and what happened after the death of George Floyd. And we know the GOP will probably use that against Governor Walz. What's your take on that, and how do you see the Harris campaign trying to maybe shift the focus from that?
Well, I didn't hear completely all of your question, but I think that you're referring to some of the hard times when Tim Walz has been governor. And I think in the most difficult situation, he has done what Minnesotans would want him to do: take charge and bring order to a difficult situation and move the state forward. So whether it's the civil unrest or COVID-19, certainly very difficult times for the state, but he provided strong and steady leadership, and his eye is always on the ball of what do I need to do as a leader of the state of Minnesota to keep Minnesotans safe and to improve their lives going forward. So not just the immediate situation, but how do we handle any particular public safety crisis, whether weather-related or anything else, in the first 24 hours, the next 48 hours. And during COVID, he referred to it as a battle rhythm, and I think we talked about that a little bit during the civil unrest as well. And that's where his 24 years in the National Guard really serve him well as a leader under times of intense stress.
Representative Hortman, for people out there who are concerned, well, the governor, we're going to lose our governor, but then Peggy Flanagan will be taking that spot. Are you concerned that maybe that there won't be as much focus on what's happening here, and that there might be a lack of, I don't know, vision until perhaps Peggy Flanagan, Lieutenant Governor, comes right in after, when he makes that announcement, whether he stays, because he can choose to stay on as governor, or I guess I would assume that he could also step down, considering this would take a lot of focus off of the state.
Well, I think he's fully capable of being both the governor and the candidate for vice president at the same time. I think the Walz-Flanagan team has been a team. They have both been extraordinary leaders for the state. And I think when Governor Walz chose Lieutenant Governor Flanagan as his running mate, he chose her for the strengths that she brings to the ticket. She has been a phenomenal partner for the legislature and for all the goals that we've worked on together. I mean, ultimately, when you get elected to a leadership position, whether it's speaker, governor, or lieutenant governor, you're a leader of a team. And so you bring the team's perspectives forward. You represent the team. And I think she has done an extraordinary job of that. We served together in the Minnesota House when we were just both podunk state legislators, not either one of us in a leadership role. And she's just a phenomenal advocate for the people she's represented, and she's become a phenomenal advocate for the people of Minnesota.
Representative Hortman, I know you mentioned kind of that dad vibe of Governor Walz. Do you expect to see a lot of red flannel in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, it seems like in the near term we'll see T-shirts and jeans. Definitely, we'll probably graduate to buffalo plaid when it gets a little colder
in the fall.
Yeah.
All right, Representative Hortman, we appreciate your time here on this busy morning for you as well as us here at Fox 9. Thanks for the time.
Happy to chat.
Thank you. And as we mentioned, we are following breaking news with Governor Tim Walz being chosen as Kamala Harris's VP pick. Our Paul Bloom is in the newsroom right now, and we talked to you earlier. We know you've followed him for many years. You've interviewed him numerous times. Tell us a little bit about what you have experienced in just kind of spending some time with the man that people may not know.
Yeah, I mean, certainly a fascinating day to have, the guy you remember the election night 2018 going out for a jog before waiting election results, kind of being the first reporter to grab him when he's elected governor 6 years ago after a decade in the House. But one aspect since you last spoke to me I thought was important is this talk about Minneapolis in the aftermath of George Floyd 4 years ago now, and the criticisms, if you will, of Governor Walz and between the relationship there with Mayor Jacob Frey, when the National Guard was called in, when it wasn't. Did they wait too long? And what we certainly anticipate the Republicans will attack him on. I happened to spend a few minutes on a Zoom call just a few minutes ago with Jeff Hayden, a former state law lawmaker, a dozen years in the legislature, a guy who represented a portion of South Minneapolis that was burned and looted and really destroyed. And I sort of asked him what his take is will Governor Walz wear that? Will Republicans be able to successfully pin those several days after George Floyd was murdered by a Minneapolis police officer 4 years ago? And he has Governor Walz's back. Now, remember that Jeff Hayden is a Democratic, a DFL lawmaker, so it may not surprise you, but he says nobody at that moment in time was going to prevent what occurred in the heart of the pandemic, the aftermath, the video of Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd's neck for some 9-10 minutes. So he definitely appreciated the leadership that eventually would get Minnesota and get Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota through those dark days. But again, speaking with Jeff Hayden a few moments ago, I thought I'd share his thoughts with our viewers here now.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, first of all, anybody from Minnesota, we have a great history of having great vice presidents, Walter Mondale, the great Hubert Humphrey. So in that tradition, we have a lot of civic pride in being able to contribute to our country's direction and its governance. I mean, the one thing that I think that Governor Walz brings to the table is that he is from rural America. He was born and raised in Nebraska. He was in the National Guard. He was a football coach, a teacher. He then, moved to Mankato. He got his graduate degree at Minnesota State, Mankato, what we used to call Mankato State. He taught there, and then he ran for office because he really believed that the Southern District, the first district, Southern Minnesota, really needed some balance. And he went and served had a distinguished career in Congress before he ran for governor. But I guess I'll say that he has those Midwestern values. I think that he can be very helpful to the current vice president and Democratic nominee Kamala Harris in a lot of those states in which they want to hear, Wisconsin and Michigan and even Pennsylvania, that has kind of this hardworking kind of rural America feel. Governor Walz really can do a great job.
So there you go, former state lawmaker Jeff Hayden, again, someone who represented a district of Minneapolis burned in the aftermath. He is bullish on Governor Walz now as a vice presidential selection for Kamala Harris. I know we have U.S. Senator Tina Smith standing by, so let me send it back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
We are now going with Senator Tina Smith. She joins us on the phone, and we're so happy that you made some time for us this morning. We know it is a busy morning. We know that you've already put something out on X. Your response? Okay. You said the energy is palpable, and you're going to fight like hell to get this ticket across the finish line. So we kind of understand that your excitement.
It is. I think it's very exciting for Minnesota, and this is such a strong ticket. I loved hearing Jeff Hayden talk about what Governor Walz brings to the ticket in terms of who he is and what his life has been like, what his experience has been like. And I think that is going to be, I think also he's going to be such a strong governing partner with Vice President Harris. Here is a leader in Governor Walz who's worked in the legislative branch and in the executive branch. He has strong small town roots, and he's also shown how to get things done in a very closely divided and challenging legislative environment. And I know that that's what Vice President Harris is interested in, too, is making progress for people.
Senator Smith, just kind of give us an overview. Obviously, you have known the governor for a very long time. You guys are very close, have worked on a number of issues. We know him to an extent, as much as you do. I would say a lot of other people in the country, maybe this is the first time they've been hearing him over the last couple of days this week. What do you think people should know about him? What do you think they will learn about him? Maybe even Minnesotans. What do you think we will learn about him in the next few weeks to come?
I think people will learn, one, what a big heart he has. Also, just what an effective leader he is. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, people want to look at their leaders and say, like, who is this guy? Well, how, you know, can I trust him? Can I trust him to make good decisions? And what the people will see about Governor Walz, and that I've seen since I've known him for, gosh, probably nearly 20 years, is that he's just the real deal. The person that you see in front of the camera is exactly the same guy that you see when you're, you know, sitting around a picnic table and just talking. He doesn't put on airs. He's not, you know, doesn't try to pretend that he's something that he isn't. And I think because of that, he's able to just talk to so many different kinds of people about what's going on in their lives. The other thing I really have always admired about Tim is, while he's very strong and he's not afraid to fight for what he believes in, he doesn't have a huge ego. You know, he's not always looking to be at the front of the parade. He is looking to be part of part of the work to make progress for people. And I think that that's so important. You know, at the end of the day, the reason that we do politics is because we want to accomplish things for people. We want to help make life better for people. And I know that that's what motivates him. And the other thing I'll say, just because I really love the guy so much, is you'll see what a strong family person he is. He loves his family. He loves his kids and his wife and his pets. And I think in that sense, a lot of folks can really relate to him. I love these videos he has done over the years with his kids. I think they kind of give you a window into who he is.
Senator Smith, we know, and we're already seeing this, of course, on social media, that he will also be facing a fair amount of criticism from the GOP, from the Trump campaign, specifically about the unrest following the murder of George Floyd. How do you expect that he is going to face that criticism, especially when you're talking about the rest of the country?
Well, I think that it's totally predictable. I think that the former president and his running mate are sort of scrambling. They can see the energy and the enthusiasm that has been building around Vice President Harris and now Governor Walz, and they're just kind of, you know, throwing every noodle that they can think of at the wall to see if something will stick. And I don't think that that is going to work. I think that people are interested in looking forward and not backward, and they want to know what their candidates are going to do for them, and not just listen to the attacks. I know from having worked in the city of Minneapolis, I live in the city of Minneapolis, we all know what a terrible time it was in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd. And what I saw in Governor Walz's leadership was a deep understanding of the pain that so many people in the community were experiencing after the horrible killing of George Floyd, and also a determination to bring order and restore peace in the streets of Minneapolis. And, you know, understand that the uprisings that happened in Minneapolis were played out in communities around the country. It was one of the most consequential things that have happened, I think, in our country since the 1960s. And what he showed, I thought, was very strong leadership.
Senator Smith, as you're speaking right now, we're taking live looks right now. This is over the governor's residence in St. Paul. You see a lot of black SUVs. I believe we just saw his wife and daughter get into one of those black SUVs. It looks like maybe they're heading out. We know, obviously, he is expected to meet Kamala Harris in Philadelphia later today for a campaign rally. They're first together as pair later tonight. So maybe that's maybe they're on the move. They've got to get from St. Paul to Philadelphia at some point. But we're watching this kind of unfold real time as the vehicles look to be leaving. Obviously, there are, I don't know, at least about a dozen black SUVs right there, and a lot of people, a lot of commotion there at the new residence, the temporary residence of the governor at this point. Walk us through what this means for Minnesota going forward. Obviously, we are going to be thrown into the spotlight. We are right now. We have been in maybe the last couple of days as his name was being floated around. We see him leaving right now, more people going to the streets, presumably supporters, a lot of media. That is a neighborhood, so a lot of people just walking outside saying hello. Walk us through what this kind of looks like for us now going forward, and what you expect to be the case for Minnesota, and maybe, you know, not even just Minnesota, but Wisconsin now in very much at play.
Well, I think that the excitement. I was at an event with Governor Walz and Gwen Walz last night, and the excitement that people feel for him running for vice president is just, people are just thrilled, I think. And so that's going to be playing out, and I don't think it's going to dissipate. I don't think it's going to go away. Tonight, we're going to have an opportunity to see this rally that will be happening in Philadelphia. I understand that they had to basically the rally sold out with like 30,000 people planning on being there. So the governor and first lady are going to be really, thrown into this incredibly exciting time. And I, of course, think about their own lives and how their lives are being upended, knowing them as my friends. For Minnesota, I think it's going to be exciting to have so much attention paid to what we've been doing here, what we've been working on, the record of the governor and the state legislature. Of course, we're really blessed in Minnesota with a very strong lieutenant governor. Governor Walz will continue to be the governor until election, until he's sworn in as vice president. But in the meantime, I think it's really reassuring that our lieutenant governor, Peggy Flanagan, is so capable and has such deep experience, having been Governor Walz governing partner these last 8 years. And so that'll be, I think, exciting for people to get to know Lieutenant Governor Flanagan better as well as the weeks unfold.
Wondering if you would, Senator Smith, weigh in, or at least your thoughts on Barack Obama weighed in. He said, like Vice President Harris, Governor Tim Walz believes the government works to serve us, not just some of us, but all of us. That's what makes him an outstanding governor, and that's what will make him an even better vice president. Michelle and I couldn't be happier for Tim Walz. That coming in from Barack Obama, former president.
That's fantastic. That makes me so happy, and I would expect, that's what I would expect and hope for. And, it reminds me that when Governor Walz first ran, here he was, a member of Congress he first ran for governor, a member of Congress representing a district in southern Minnesota that had been represented by Republicans for like 100 years. And he was the first Democrat to win in that district. And he ran on the idea of one Minnesota, that we're all in this together, that we take care of our friends and neighbors, that's what we should be thinking about as we govern ourselves. And I know that just jibes with what I hear President Obama talking about, and the opportunities for us to be unified in this moment with this great ticket.
Let's talk about that One Minnesota campaign and kind of maybe one America, if you will, if you want to broaden it out. Obviously, we know so much is on the line this election. We know so much has been talked about the independents and the undecided. Looking at this ticket, the Walz-Harris ticket, and the Vance-Trump ticket, the Trump-Vance ticket, there's been so much talk about, going to the base. And a lot of people are saying Walz's pick is definitely leaning in towards the base, not so much maybe that independent, kind of the undecided. What's your take on that? Do you think Walz can reach out to those people who have not decided who they're gonna vote for come November?
I absolutely do. I think that both Governor Walz and Vice President Harris are already doing that. Certainly as Tim has run and won in Minnesota, it's because he was not only able to get people in base Democratic voters excited about what could be accomplished, but also bringing along independents and even, more moderate Republicans who wanted a government that was actually working and functioning to deliver results for people. And so in that sense, he brings a very common sense, kind of down-to-earth approach. I can easily picture him campaigning in Wisconsin, where there are many, many independent voters and moderate Republican voters, in western Pennsylvania, and even in the congressional district in Nebraska that would be a part of a path to 270 electoral college votes. I think that he just has the capacity to connect with people who don't think about politics first every morning when they wake up. That's what most people are like. They don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican. They're thinking about what they have to do that day and how to get through their lives and how to take care of their families. And Tim has a way of connecting with those people that is beyond politics. It's really about what your hopes are for the future. And that, I think, makes him a really strong campaigner, even in red parts of our country.
Well, Senator Tina Smith, I'm sure your phone is blowing up this morning. You're getting a lot of phone calls, and people want to pick your mind just as you let us this morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us about this big announcement here. Senator Tina Smith on the phone with us this morning.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, you are continuing to watch breaking news here coming to you live from Fox 9 and Fox Local. We are going to take a quick break, kind of gather ourselves, work on more sources, more conversations, more interviews. We will be right back. Stay with us. You're continuing to watch breaking news on this Tuesday morning. Welcome back. It is 10:18 right now. We continue to follow breaking news. If you are just joining us this morning, Governor Tim Walz has been chosen to be Kamala Harris's vice presidential candidate and running mate. Those two will join together on the stage later today in Philadelphia. We just saw what it appeared to be Governor Walz, possibly, at least his family was leaving the governor's residence out of St. Paul.
That line of black SUVs leaving, and we can imagine that it is a very busy spot right now. We're going to look at some tweets out there, and one of them from our Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan.
Yes, here she goes, posting obviously a picture of the two side by side, saying, "I have been friends with Tim Walz for almost 20 years, and for more than 5 years. He's been my partner in justice at the Minnesota Capitol. He has the grit and the grace to keep our country moving forward alongside Kamala Harris. Let's get them elected," with her photo there. Of course, she is very excited. A lot of people are commenting, saying potentially what this means for her going forward. Again, what happens, it all obviously depends on what happens in November. We will wait and see, but big changes could be coming her in her direction. Sure.
Well, Bill Keller has been outside of Governor Walz's residence with the very latest. We've been getting a bird's eye view of all the activity and all the black SUVs. And tell us who's been leaving, who's there, what's going on right now.
Yeah, well, it started out early this morning. There were no black SUVs. Then they started pulling in. That was our first indication that he might be getting the nod for this running mate position with Kamala Harris. Now, for the last 2 hours, this has really developed into kind of a block party atmosphere. People just showing up, taking selfies. A lot of folks started to gather by the fence, almost like they were waiting for the groundhog to appear. And there was a time there where I thought that might actually happen. It would be consistent with Governor Walz's personality just to come out and say, hey, thank you for the support. But I think because of the security concerns and the level at which he is now operating, that's not why that did not happen. But we did see the crowd cheering as the line of SUVs did pull away. Things are starting to wind down a little bit, but certainly a very unexpected, exciting morning here in St. Paul. I can also tell you that we talked to a lot of people who are very supportive, and they are anxious to see the rest of the country get to know the Governor Walz that most already do. Take a listen to one.
Hey, what's going through your mind right now? You're kind of wiping tears almost.
I'm really excited. This is very, very hopeful. He's a good governor. I think he'll be a great vice president.
How did you find out?
Actually, a group text with my book club. So I just sent him a picture from here. It's really exciting.
What will the rest of the country learn about Governor Walz that we probably already know?
Well, you know what? He's very sensible. I think he represents a lot of America. I think that he's very supportive of freedoms, but also freedoms not just for me, but also for thee, that you can be a gun owner and a hunter, but weapons of mass destruction don't need to be on the streets. I think freedom for women to choose and have their own life choices. I think he's very practical, and I think he's both eloquent and can speak to a lot of different things that are really important to all of America.
And I think that is probably a really good summary of exactly why Vice President Kamala Harris chose Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. That woman there really kind of laying it out for what the appeal is here. In fact, as I was watching the crowd, guys, I saw a couple of people in gopher shirts on bicycles with bicycle helmets, about the same general build as the governor. And for a second there, I almost thought, is he blending into the crowd? But I think that is part of his everyman persona, that he does just blend in. And he could have been anybody who was here waiting to see him.
Sure, kind of a hustle of activity behind you still. All right, Bill Keller for us there in St. Paul. Thank you.
And our Rob Olson has been taking a look now at reaction from all across the country. And he joins us live now in the newsroom. So what are you seeing, Rob? You're kind of going through, I'm sure, X and various social media sites. Tell us about some of the reaction that you've seen.
Well, the reaction is piling up quickly, and of course that reaction all depends on which side of the political aisle you fall on. Much of it very partisan divide here, because obviously this is a political issue. So that's what we're seeing. First of all, though, let's show you that Governor Walz actually confirming it himself with this tweet that he put out, or pardon me, at X. It is the honor of a lifetime to join Kamala Harris in this campaign. I'm all in, is what he wrote there, showing us the politics of what's possible. Very much Walzian words there and language in his gubernatorial campaigns. It reminds me a bit of the first day of school. Let's get this done. Senator Tina Smith we just had her on, obviously, for an extended interview, but here's the visual of what she did. And again, this is very much in her language. Donut count Minnesota out. Congratulations, Governor Walz. Of course, she was his lieutenant governor as well. Congresswoman Betty McCollum. Tim is a rock-solid Democrat, a teacher, a football coach, a veteran, and a leader who will defend our freedoms and work to improve our lives, the lives of all Americans in every corner of our country. I'm inspired, energized, and ready to get to work today to elect the Harris-Walz ticket to the White House. Let's go, Kamala and Tim. And Angie Craig, Congresswoman Angie Craig, congrats to our governor and vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, former soldier, teacher, congressman, and not weird, which of course is something that Walz became known for, is his use of the word weird in interviews on cable news that has popped up in a lot of different people talking about as surrogates for this campaign, this weird language. Tom Emmer, Congressman Tom Emmer, he spoke very critically of Tim Walz quite a bit, especially while he was at the Donald Trump rally in St. Cloud about a week and a half ago. Much of the same language here that he said then. It's not surprising Kamala Harris picked Tim Walz to be her running mate. He embodies the same disastrous economic, open borders, and soft on crime policies Harris has inflicted on our country the last 4 years. Calls him an empty suit who has worked to turn Minnesota into Harris's home state of California and solidifies this ticket's full embrace of a radical America Last agenda. That is very similar in vein to what I've seen throughout. But Dean Phillips, again, on the Democratic side, and somebody who had briefly his own campaign to challenge Joe Biden, saying very early on that he didn't think Joe Biden was capable of running for a second term. He today said Tim Walz can fix a lawnmower, fire a cannon, and fiercely protect women's freedoms all in one day. A lot of reaction that just keeps pouring in here. Former President Obama also putting out a statement just a little bit ago. I did just look up two here. We haven't had time to transfer them to a full screen like that. But the reaction from Donald Trump's Republican primary challengers, who've all endorsed him now and at the Republican National Convention spoke in his favor. Nikki Haley says Democrats doubling down on the progressive movement. Walz, misspelling his name like the dance, is a win for open borders, socialism, and Iran. Ron DeSantis saying in 2021, Minnesotans were roughly 5 times more likely to move to Florida than vice versa. They were fleeing a state that under Governor Walz turned its back on law and order, increased taxes, and imposed unscientific coronavirus restrictions. Vivek Ramaswamy saying Walz is a massive gift to Republicans. The media keeps trying to hand Kamala the race on a silver platter, but apparently she refused to accept it. So a lot of reaction from the Republican side saying that they believe that this makes it such a progressive ticket that maybe it makes it easier to beat come November. And then on the Democratic side saying this really solidifies this ticket and broadens the appeal. Of course, this is up to voters in the next 3 months to determine exactly which way that this does throw the campaign. But you see the partisan divide so quickly taking place. We're going to keep an eye on this, and we'll check back with you in a little bit. Back to you guys.
Yeah, very much a tale of two sides. All right, Rob Olson, thanks for bringing those reactions to us. We appreciate it.
Well, Fox 9's Corin Hogger just landed, we understand, in Philadelphia, where there is, of course, a big rally there today, and Harris expected to speak at 4:30 this afternoon. So, Corin, you got on your flight, not even knowing yet the pick. What's been happening since then?
Yeah, we just landed. Did something happen? I'm not sure. No. We were following Twitter all the way and communicating with some of the governor's staff. And actually, in my row, everybody was asleep except for me, but I could hear some rumbling behind from other people who were kind of doing the same thing as me and just monitoring, X and all the social media, and figured out that our governor was indeed going to be the vice presidential nominee to stand beside Kamala Harris. So we came out here not knowing for sure whether he was the guy, but we knew he was down to 1 or 2, and he was right there with them. So tonight, we beat him here. We know he's just left East Cliff not that long ago, and so he'll be on a plane over here, and we'll see him here tonight, standing next to Vice President Harris for the first time as the Democratic ticket, although that won't become official until probably tomorrow, when the electors in the Democratic Party get to actually cast their votes and approve him as the vice presidential nominee. But excited to hear what he has to say tonight. You have heard from Rob just now the reaction from local Democrats, some of the national Democrats, and the other side as well. And it'll be interesting to see how this race shapes up. We do know Shapiro, the governor here in Pennsylvania, was one of the finalists, and he has gotten behind Walz as the candidate. Barack Obama has done the same. Mark Kelly, potentially another one of the finalists, has done the same. And we know that Tim Walz, in Minnesota, has won a congressional race in a traditionally Republican rural district, and that seems to be what they'll be looking for him to do, is to appeal to voters in some of those districts that could swing either way and potentially come to the Democrats when it comes time for November. Alex Kelly?
Yeah, Corin, I know you can't see this, but we were just looking at some live aerial footage of the plane that presumably is taking Walz to where you are. As you mentioned, you beat him there to Philadelphia. We understand that rally today at Temple University, seating of up to 10,000 people. We had heard that they have sold out, expected it to be a big event. Obviously, all eyes knew that this rally, the Harris campaign, Corin, had mentioned that this was going to be the spot where we would meet her running mate. So this was not a surprise necessarily. The surprise was going to be who's going to be alongside her. I mean, I know this is still kind of early and you just got off the plane, but what do you expect? What are we expecting from this? What do you think we're going to hear? I know you follow politics here locally at the Capitol. What do you think we're going to hear when it comes to Walz and what he will say?
I think you're going to hear much the same as we've heard from him in Minnesota. He's got this, folksy reputation of the way of speaking, and one of the things I read today was one of the reasons that Vice President Harris has chosen him to be her running mate was just kind of the rapport that they developed when they spoke. And he just has this kind of easygoing way about him that kind of wins a lot of people over and when he's having his personal touch with them. And it seems he's won over Kamala Harris, and we expect him to try to do that with the rest of the nation. As you know, he hasn't won over a lot of Republicans in Minnesota, so, they'll have their say about that. We've seen, revelations about fraud within the government, and we're hearing a lot from Minnesota Republicans about how he has let this happen under his watch, and so they'll challenge that folksiness, and maybe that folksiness means that there's not enough oversight. So we'll hear that through the campaign, but tonight you'll hear probably Governor Tim Walz, introduce the presidential candidate now, Kamala Harris, and try to engage, as he has in Minnesota, with a lot of rural voters especially. But everyone, he's somebody who has been credited with crossing lines when he was a school teacher and won Teacher of the Year in Mankato. Some of his fellow teachers said he was the guy who could reach across lines. He's the guy who could talk to the poor kids and the rich kids. He could talk to the kids from every race. And that is what the Democrats will look for him to do tonight and all the way through November and potentially beyond.
All right. Yeah, you've kind of become a quickly an ambassador in Minnesota, at least for the day. I'm sure people will want to ask you a lot of questions about, obviously, Tim Walz and being selected. But also, waltzing apparently is the new dance that we're seeing on Twitter.
Corin, we'll let you. Yeah, we'll let you get your luggage. I know you got to.
I was going to say.
Go ahead.
He actually has some appeal with younger voters, I've noticed. My daughter, one of them, she's 20 years old, and she's mentioned that he gets a lot of play on TikTok and some of the social media that I'm not so great at. So, maybe that's another aspect of his likability that the vice president might have appreciated.
Sure. Corin, I know you got a big day. We'll let you go. We'll get you set up for the big rally later this afternoon, but we appreciate you joining us here live on the air as you just landed in Philly. Thank you.
Of course, much more on this breaking news this morning. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a few minutes.
Good morning and welcome back here. We continue to follow breaking news, of course, here locally and nationally. Governor Tim Walz, Minnesota governor, tapped to be Kamala Harris's vice president nominee for the Democratic ticket. And earlier this morning, we spoke with Hammond political professor David Schultz. Here's what he had to say about this pick that just came down this morning.
For people maybe just tuning in, what does this mean for Minnesota?
What it means for Minnesota is a few different things. First off, of course, it puts Minnesota on the map again. You know, for many people on the two coasts, we're flyover zone. Suddenly, everybody's going to be interested in Minnesota and the Minnesota governor. But internally to politics, what this means is a couple of possibilities here. One is assuming that Harris does win and Walz is the VP. He resigns as governor probably at the end of the year. This means Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan goes up to become governor. Bobby Joe Champion, who is the president of the Senate, goes up to become lieutenant governor. And it has a cascading effect in terms of what it means for other positions. But if that were to happen, we would have the first female governor, first Native American governor in Minnesota, and we would have the first African-American lieutenant governor in Minnesota. So a lot of, let's say, again, cascading or domino effects internally in Minnesota politics.
Let's talk about this pick. We knew pretty much at the start of the day it was likely going to be Walz or Shapiro. Those were the two top finalists. The final two is what we were hearing from sources all across the board. What do you think changed? Why do you think Walz tipped the scales, if you will? Why do you think he was picked over Shapiro out of Pennsylvania?
Okay, I think a couple of possibilities. One, I'll first say that he's been a very good, that is Walz, a very good defender of Democratic Party values and a very good in terms of criticizing the Trump administration and, let's say, the Republicans. I think that's first. Second, I always say that the first factor in terms of picking a vice president is do no harm. And there were some people who said that Shapiro's stance on Israel, some will even go as far as saying because he was Jewish, also hurt him in terms of possibilities. But at the end of the day, I think for Walz, he represents a lot of what the progressives in the Democratic Party want to do. You know, his positions on abortion, LGBTQ issues, the spending for educational funding, for a whole host of issues, voting rights, I think is important. And what this signals to me is that Harris is going to run a campaign from the progressive left at this point, is that she was not going with a more moderate Shapiro, a more moderate Kelly from Arizona, but is going to run really a progressive ticket and set up a clear contrast between the Trump-Vance ticket. So this is a pretty significant direction for Harris to be going for Walz. And also, given the fact that he's a relative unknown across the country at this point, I think one of the challenges is going to be to ask how well does Walz introduce himself and can he help deliver some additional votes that Harris will need in those critical swing states to be able to win the election.
You were saying that he kind of checked the box, do no harm. There wasn't enough negative stuff out there about him.
Correct.
But we can probably guess that the GOP is going to go on the offense. The first, right out of the gate, will probably be the civil unrest following George Floyd. You know, the visuals, the video. Is that where you think that their first attack is going to go?
I think it's exactly where it's going to be because you're right. We have an awful lot of video out there that they can show that's very graphic and very compelling. So I think that's going to be the first issue, and then the second is going to be on his liberalism at this point and him being a progressive, liberal candidate. And this is going to be an issue because the 6 swing states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, they're clearly more conservative than the state of Minnesota, and partly why they're swing states is because of their real sort of centrist stance. And the question becomes now, by picking Walz, is she hoping to more mobilize progressive voters, or does she go after more centrist voters? And the pick of Walz suggests that maybe less of going after those centrist swing voters. This is a pretty big gamble in terms of where she's going here. And obviously, of course, we won't know till November 5th, Election Day, whether the gamble is worthwhile.
Kind of a shift on what some people thought she would do and what her campaign would do. You mentioned the do no harm, but also in the past, oftentimes the VP candidate has also kind of been the one who could maybe go a little further, could say some things that the initial candidate, the presidential candidate, couldn't say. How do you see Walz and Vance when it comes to head-to-head with the VP candidates?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, first off, I think Trump is pretty aggressive in terms of his rhetoric at this point. Harris is trying to run an upbeat, positive campaign. I think she will leave it up to Walz to take on the Republicans in harsher language. I still don't think you're going to see it in terms of as harsh as you might see coming from the other side for the Republicans. J.D. Vance was picked, I think, in part because Trump is also appealing to what? The base. I mean, it's what's interesting about this election here. Trump and Vance, Harris and Walz, this is all about what we're going to call mobilizing the base politics. They're not really going after too many of the swing voters at this point, however few there are. They're really aiming and saying, get the base excited, mobilize them heavily, and hope that that wins the election. And in the process, if there are some swing voters out there, either hope they vote for you or they don't vote whatsoever. So in some sense, both campaigns are playing base politics.
Yeah, Walz has been, at least nationally, his name has been thrown out there a lot recently, and kind of for his folksy style, the fact that he's able to be more direct, and we know that the term weird he has been using, and maybe he is appealing to a base that is uncertain as far as on the right, that kind of throwing out some of those terms that maybe we're not seeing from Kamala Harris, who's taking a different stance as far as the way she's communicating the message.
I think you're right. But again, given how polarized we are in this country, Walz is not going to bring over people from the right at this point. Now, maybe 6 years ago, in a different era, when Walz first ran for governor, you remember he ran under the banner of One Minnesota, tried to talk about campaigning across the aisles, working across the aisles. He's long since abandoned that approach and has really become sort of, changed into a partisan, liberal Democrat. But we're in a state in American politics where, again, there are so few undecided voters. As I keep pointing out to people, this election is going to come down to about 150,000 to 200,000 swing voters in about 5 or 6 swing states. That's how few people are going to really decide what happens in the Electoral College to get elected, to President of the United States. Walz may or may not be able to move some of those few 150,000 voters, but certainly no candidate is going to move somebody on the far right or far left just simply because of the polarization that we have.
Sure. David Schultz, thank you so much. Thanks for letting us pick your brain on this very busy Tuesday morning.
Yes, that was from earlier this morning, but he certainly gave us a lot of useful information, and we'll be talking to more political analysts, pundits. We've talked to senators this morning, and we're just getting started.
We are going to take a quick break here as we continue our breaking news coverage here on Fox 9 and Fox Local. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Well, welcome back. We are following, of course, breaking news here for you this morning as Governor Tim Walz, Minnesota governor, has been chosen as Kamala Harris's VP pick. Of course, those two are set to meet tonight for the first time for a campaign rally in Philadelphia. Just in right now, President Joe Biden putting out a statement here. I want to read some of it in part, saying, I have known Tim Walz for nearly 2 decades, first during his time in Congress and also as governor. He says as a husband and a father, he's been a school teacher and a high school football coach. He goes on to say the Harris-Walz ticket will be a powerful voice for working people and America's great middle class. So just a portion of what the president has come out, obviously, as we continue to follow this breaking news.
That's right. And of course, a lot of reporters have followed Governor Walz. Fox 9's Paul Bloom is one of them. He joins us right now live in our newsroom to just kind of give us some insight into what you've learned throughout the years in some of the interviews that you've had with Governor Walz.
Yeah, Alex, Kelly, good morning to you. Crazy day here in the newsroom, of course, tracking reaction to this enormous news. I just shared with you folks earlier that I was with Governor Walz 2018 November, at the time Congressman Tim Walz on his election night victory, and was sort of the first reporter to get on him about the one Minnesota victory that night. The folksy flannel, the red and black jackets, the shirts he was wearing that night. But one of the things I've been digging into this morning is his reaction has come in, and we anticipate where the attacks will come against the Governor Walz on this national ticket now is Minneapolis, the aftermath of George Floyd. Just off the phone a minute ago with the Attorney General, of course, Keith Ellison. Interesting story about Attorney General Ellison is both he and Tim Walz came through the quote-unquote Camp Wellstone Democratic DFL effort to put Democratic lawmakers in office in the shadows, in the wake of Paul Wellstone. They ran for Congress. They were elected to Congress the same time period, the same year, 2006. So they know each other well. And when I asked Keith Ellison about labeling the leadership of Tim Walz at the time of the Minneapolis, the unrest, the burning, the looting, the destruction across Minneapolis, he said, you know what, there's only one person to blame for that at that time, and that's Derek Chauvin. He supported and says Governor Walz did everything he could. He deployed the National Guard. He took back the city eventually and brought peace and prosperity back to the city and Minnesota. And to that point, I also have since spoken with former lawmaker, South Minneapolis lawmaker Jeff Hayden, who also, again, a DFL elected official, but he too supported Tim Walz's efforts during that difficult, dark days after the murder of George Floyd. Here's Jeff Hayden a few minutes ago with me.
With former President Trump, you don't know what you might see. He may say or do anything. Here's what we know was that, and that was a district that I represented, that was a longstanding issue of the police and the community clashing. And at that tension point of the George Floyd murder, and I know there's a lot of controversy about it, that spiraled out of control that no one, I don't know anybody that would have been able to stop that at the time. Governor Walz stepped in decisively. We got it under control. But what I'd really like to think about is the great work that we did. I helped, and Governor Walz was leading the effort at doing really sensible police reforms that have gotten our state back on track, has gotten the police on track, and the rebuilding, not only by the government that has put in a ton of money, but also rallying around the business community and others. There's more that we could do, but Minneapolis is well back on track, and the state is back on track because of Minneapolis, because of Governor Walz.
And that, of course, there's some of the rebuttal we anticipate hearing if the Republicans do attack this ticket for what happened in Minneapolis in the days following George Floyd. And, of course, Kamala Harris being linked to the Minnesota Bail Fund organization, the Freedom Fund, if you will. So there's a lot of, you just expect a lot of attention, spotlight on Minneapolis 2020, of course, Memorial Day and those early days of June. And that is some of the DFL response, the Democratic response we would certainly expect to the defense of Governor Tim Walz, now VP choice on the national Democratic ticket. With that, we'll send it back to you both in the newsroom.
In our newsroom, thanks so much for your thoughts about your days on the campaign trail and what you've learned from our Governor Tim Walz.
Yes, right now we are joined by former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. Hello, sir. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning to you and your viewers.
Okay, let's first get your reaction. We knew it was maybe happening. We knew it was possible that he would be tapped. What do you think?
Well, first of all, congratulations to Governor Walz. This is a huge honor and a huge accomplishment. I know him and I like him. I don't agree with him politically, but my congratulations to him. And it also brings some attention and some fun to Minnesota politics as well. Beyond that, I would say the pick represents a couple things. One is it's a doubling down of sort of the so-called progressive or Democratic Social Alliance agenda. I think he and Vice President Harris are aligned philosophically and politically. But what he brings to the table is a different style and different geography. She has sort of the San Francisco, California vibe. He's going to have sort of the Bernie Sanders and hunting gear vibe. So it's the same product, just in different wrappers.
Okay, so what are you hearing from your colleagues on the other side? I mean, we kind of see where this may be going as far as, you know, we've heard, of course, a lot of praise for him this morning, but also it's hard to discount what happened here following George Floyd and the civil unrest. How do you expect your Republican friends to react to this and to perhaps from now until the election to go after Walz? Because, of course, this is politics.
Yep. Well, the Trump campaign hit list is going to include the following. Number one, failure to timely send in the Guard after the Minneapolis riots. Number two, the biggest spending increases in the history of the state of Minnesota, 40% or nearly so in one budget cycle. Rising crime. Big high-profile fraud cases within state government under his watch, with a legislative auditor, nonpartisan, saying you're not taking it seriously, you're not taking our feedback seriously, and more. And of course, the target audience for a lot of this is going to be persuadable voters in swing states, and I think that's going to be of interest to those voters.
Kind of take us back. Obviously, want to pick your brain. Several years back, you were considered to be on that short list as well. What was that like? And maybe kind of take us through what has been happening behind closed doors, behind the scenes for Governor Walz as we finally are getting to this point today.
Yeah, well, of course, in my case, the process was longer because we had the traditional campaign calendar. Here it was very much abbreviated, but it included responding to a long, lengthy written questionnaire that delved into everything from your health, your finances, your political record, your family, your relatives, you know, any litigation, your investments, everything. And then all of those documents had to be produced and sent in. There were interviews. You know, lawyers came out from Washington and interviewed you and cross-examined you about your whole life. Eventually, you know, you fly around with, in that case, John McCain around the country and around the world and sort of audition for the role. And then at the end, when all the information's submitted and all is done, you just have to sit and wait. And that's an anxious, hopeful time. I'm sure the last 24, 48 hours for Governor Walz were all of that. And then he finally got the call. And good for him that he did. Congratulations. But as that last period of time, you know, it's anxious. It's an anxious and interesting and hopeful time.
Sure. Yeah, the vetting process, as you said, so many questions, and they have to be thorough because really, if there's anything in their past, it needs to come out beforehand. And it's been a shorter period of time, as we know. You said that you and Governor Walz, that you're on different sides of the aisle, different opinions about certain things, but you. From just having some kind of a personal relationship with him, can you tell us a little bit more about the way that you've seen him operate when it comes to talking to people, you know, out there, Minnesotans in general?
Yeah, on a personal level, he's energetic, he's friendly, he's folksy, he's interested in issues, he likes to campaign, he can talk like most politicians. I used to say, talk dogs off a meat wagon. And I think the so-called Walz word salads will have to be tightened up because you can get away with that in local politics. But when you're on the national stage, they'll have to tighten some of that up a little bit, but they will. But he's a good campaigner, and he's a strong campaigner, and he likes to campaign. And I'm sure that'll shine through in the next 90 days. Their problem isn't going to be, you know, campaign style or skills or energy. It's going to be, is America ready for a doubling down on sort of this Democrat socialist agenda? Trump's got his own problems, by the way. I think this ticket, the Harris-Walz ticket, would be pretty beatable if the Republicans had a better candidate. You know, they're going to be able to take advantage of the fact there's a bunch of Republicans and independents who don't like Trump.
You mentioned, too, obviously, maybe one of the appeals. We don't know. Obviously, you're looking at all these little indicators. One of the ideas behind maybe picking Walz was kind of trying to hit that upper Midwest area and try to maybe, obviously, get Minnesota, but maybe Wisconsin, maybe Michigan, maybe some of those spots that appear to be up in the air at this point. Do you think his experience here in Minnesota, his reputation in Minnesota plays well with voters in Wisconsin and Michigan, maybe even parts of Ohio, Pennsylvania, that kind of vibe. What do you think?
Well, I think, again, it's a clever pick in this regard. Vice President Harris gets her philosophical, policy mate, but it comes in a wrapper that looks and feels and presents and sounds stylistically and tonally Midwestern. Again, I like to say it's Bernie Sanders in hunting gear, and we'll see if that works. But I think the Trump campaign is going to make it very clear that this just isn't some moderate centrist person. This is, they're going to characterize it as a radical ticket, and I don't know how well that'll sell in places like Pennsylvania, for example.
So can we take from this conversation that you are not a supporter of the Trump campaign? Because you seem to suggest that there are people out there that are not really happy about the pick.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to vote for the Harris-Walz ticket because I'm not into, sort of hard left politics and approaches. I've also expressed my skepticism for Trump. No question. I have voted for him in the past. He obviously has his limitations. I'm not sure I would characterize myself as, well, I'm certainly a strong Republican. I may end up supporting President Trump. We'll see. I'm not prepared to announce that or say that today.
Governor, as far as kind of those you mentioned, maybe on both parties, there's a lot of people who aren't super thrilled on either side. Or we've talked a lot about that, kind of the independents, the undecided, who are waiting for something to tip them to one, to the left or to the right. Do you think this is a choice that will help tip some of those undecided, or will it make it even more of a gray area?
I think the latter, for this reason. Most people don't vote for or against the vice presidential candidate. Data supports that. But there's a whole bunch of people in this country who are going to say, look, I don't want socialism or a further drift towards socialism, and this ticket kind of looks and feels like it might be headed in that direction, or at least the Democrat Social Alliance version of it, like Bernie Sanders. But they're also going to say, I don't like Trump. Because of all of the obvious reasons that we're well familiar with. So there's a subgroup of voters, and I think this is the swing voters that are going to decide this election. Do you hold your nose and vote for which ticket? If you're in that category of sort of the so-called double haters or double concerned or double skeptics of both tickets. And they're not going to vote for one or the other because they love them. They're going to like one side or they're going to be more favorable, I think, towards a side that is more reasonable. And Trump's going to have to demonstrate that he can attract some of those people by having a somewhat better campaign style. I mean, he needs to be at least 10 or 15 or 20% better than he was at the convention. He had a great opportunity to go before the country and say, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be somewhat of a unifier. I'm still going to be Trump. But instead, he went off script and did his usual shtick, and people are like, whoa, this is bringing back some flashbacks.
Yeah, how well do you think that Trump can pivot? Because we know that he was expecting to run against Biden. Biden is stepping away from running again. What, as far as him pivoting and changing messaging, we haven't seen much of that with Donald Trump. How do you think he's going to handle this now, considering he has really two new candidates, essentially, that he's running against?
That's a really great question, and a really important point is, does Donald Trump have it in him to be more disciplined to make the pivot that you just described? And these are new targets for him, but I don't think it'll be long before he gets his message, and we'll see if he can stay with a message. That's part of the problem, is does he have the ability to focus and sustain and repeat a message that works, and we'll see about that. One quick thing off question is, in this race for the VP job, one of the underreported elements of this story is the campaign within the campaign that sort of took out the contenders. And there always is this campaign, but it's usually done privately. By the way, Brian McClung, one of your upcoming guests, if he would have done this better for me, maybe I would have gotten selected. But the interest groups within the Democratic Party sort of took out Mark Kelly. The labor unions, the private labor unions, were mad at him for some labor stuff, and you can't have a base campaign with the labor unions. That's a huge part of the Democratic Party mad at you to start. So then Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania was for school choice, and that ticked off the teacher unions, and that's a huge part of the Democratic Party. And then he was also is very pro-Israel. That ticks off the sort of growing Palestinian base within the Democratic Party, or pro-Palestine base within the Democratic Party. And so those other contenders there was a campaign within the campaign that Governor Walz sort of skated above or avoided, and the progressives kind of embraced him. I think that helped him get the spot.
Yeah, I guess that was going to be my question. Do you think that Governor Walz had fewer knocks on his record, and that's what bumped him up?
From a progressive intra-Democratic Party perspective, yes. Yes, because the progressives said, we're not mad at Governor Walz. In fact, we celebrate his progressive championship. He's proclaiming he's the progressive champion. And the other candidates had baggage in that regard.
How difficult will it be for Governor Walz to be running for VP and be Kamala Harris's pick and just kind of wide-scoped type of campaign, and then also be the governor as well and all of those duties? Do you think that he can, earlier Senator Tina Smith said that she thought he could do those two things at once. Do you think that that is possible, or do you see some problems there?
I see potential problems. I think as long as nothing happens big, right now it's summertime, the legislature's not in session, but pretty soon you got to get prepared for the session. And there's work to be done in that regard. But keep in mind, there's always tornadoes, there's always floods, there could be other events that require the governor to be ready. And if something like that happens and he's AWOL, that's going to be an issue, and he'll have to suspend campaigning and come back and deal with it, and as he should.
You know this world very well. We've got less than 100 days until the election. Kind of give us an overview, kind of a look ahead. How do you see this happening on both sides, and what do you think will be kind of their talking points going forward?
I think that the Trump campaign is going to characterize the Harris Walz ticket as basically a quasi-socialist ticket that's out of step with mainstream America. And again, keep in mind the target audience here is just the persuadable voters in a small number of swing states. So it's not even really the whole country. And for those voters, they may look at the Harris Walz ticket and say, yeah, they look really, really liberal, and I'm uncomfortable with that. And of course, that side is going to look at Trump and say, we can't have a person who sometimes acts like a complete maniac back in the White House. And I think that's basically going to summarize the campaign.
All right. Well, former Governor Tim Pawlenty, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate your opinion, your thoughts on the pick for him as VP.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye. We are going to take a quick break here. You are continuing to watch breaking news coming to you live from Fox 9 and Fox Local. We'll be right back.
Thank you for joining us here at 11 o'clock on Fox 9 and Fox Local. I'm Rob Wilson, in for Tom Butler on this very eventful Tuesday morning. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz may be heading back to Washington. Remember, he served in Congress, this time as the vice president. He's been chosen this morning by current VP Kamala Harris to be her running mate in this fall's election. Bill Culler joining us live from St. Paul at the temporary governor's residence, where he has been camped out all morning and seen the change in activity throughout the morning, and joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Rob. Yeah, the dust has settled. The commotion has settled down a little bit, but what a morning it has been. In fact, take a look at some video we shot just about an hour ago, maybe a little more. This was as Governor Walz and his family believed to be leaving the compound on his way to presumably Pennsylvania for that rally tonight. The crowd started to gather just very organically, like a block party, as they began to learn the news that their governor, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, had been selected by Vice President Kamala Harris to be her running mate in the presidential election. He did not come out and address the crowd, understandably, though, for security concerns. He had a chance to spend one last night at his home, spend some time reflecting with his family. We did talk to a lot of folks out here who came to support Governor Walz. Here's some of the reasons why they say they think he was the right pick.
I'm really excited. This is very, very hopeful. He's a good governor. I think he'll be a great vice president.
How did you find out?
Actually, a group text with my book club. So I just sent him a picture from here. It's really exciting.
What will the rest of the country learn about Governor Walz that we probably already know?
Well, you know what? He's very sensible. I think he represents a lot of America.
Yeah, what is remarkable is the fact that he came out as a really far long shot as a vice presidential pick. No surprise that he was on the long list, then he made it to the short list, and then, Rob, eventually it was down to him and the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. But the bottom line, he is now headed to that state. We'll see how that plays out this evening at her rally. And again, he'll be back here, back in the Midwest tomorrow. We'll be joining him in Eau Claire, Wisconsin for the second of 7 planned rallies through swing states as they really begin to kick the Harris-Walz campaign into high gear. Back to you.
Yeah, Bill, one quick question before you go. I know it's been a long morning for you, too. You've been out there all morning. Just describe real quick the change in activity that you saw throughout the morning that made you kind of wonder, okay, maybe he is the pick after all. How did that change from the time you got there until we learned the news?
Well, when we rolled up at about 4:30 this morning, there was me and another car with its headlights on. Learned it was a producer from a national news outlet. We just camped out and waited. We saw a little activity. But then about 7 o'clock this morning, we started seeing black SUV after black SUV going through the gates here of the governor's temporary residence. At one point, I tweeted a photo of about a dozen vehicles inside. They were all staged like they're ready to go out in a motorcade. That was the first tip-off. I tweeted that out, and in fact, at one point today, a reporter from USA Today came up to me and said, "Are you Bill? Thanks for your tweet. I had no idea what was going on over here, so you're welcome."
Interesting morning. Yeah, and Secret Service protection then kicks in pretty quickly there once you are the running mate on the ticket. Well, this has been developing all morning long, and certainly a lot of reaction that we're getting from throughout the political landscape as well. And one of the big voices on this, joining us now live on the phone, is U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. Okay, via satellite. Senator Klobuchar, thanks for joining us. Sorry about the confusion here. I thought you were on the phone.
Great to be
this has
on,
been changing rapidly here.
Always here for you.
Yes. Tell me yourself, when you learned this news yourself, and what your initial reaction to as this pairing is somebody who knows Governor Tim Walz very well, but also knows the political landscape in D.C. and across the country. Your thoughts on this?
Well, I was with the governor last night at an event. He was in a jolly mood, I will say, his usual positive self. And one of the funnier things I remember from last night, is I kind of thought this was going to happen, is the band that was on this stage took the microphone by mistake. And the governor and I were looking for the microphone. This was the night before he was chosen as vice president. And he just was his the Tim Walz we know and love. I think what he brings to this ticket, one, someone you can trust. He's a personal friend of mine, and I think a lot of Minnesotans know, even if you don't agree with everything he says or does, he's someone that's true to his word. Secondly, he gets the Midwest. He grew up in a small farm in Nebraska, moved to Minnesota, Mankato, high school coach. My own in-laws brought over a chicken parmesan dinner when Gus was born because that's where they live. My husband grew up there. You know, he joins the National Guard at age 17, serves our country, and then decides to run for Congress from a district that a Democrat has only won twice in 100 years and served with really much respect there for a number of terms, and now is our governor. So I just think it's a different bio than a lot of people bring to this. He didn't go to fancy schools. He is someone who likes to hunt and fish, always at the pheasant opener, in the deer stand. It's going to be a different thing on the national stage, and I think that's good for our politics.
Now, as somebody who, you know, he served in Congress for, I think it was 12 years. You've been in the Senate for a while. There's a lot of relationships that he still has from people who were there, and of course he's the head of the Democratic Governors Association. So what does that do to help him as he assumes this role now of vice presidential candidate, those existing relationships within the House and the Senate on both sides of the aisle?
Really helpful. Helpful, of course, during a campaign for people who can vouch for him, because as I told him, having run for president myself, when you start doing these things, people are going to attack you every which way. Some of it you deal with and say, this is why I did what I did, but some of it's just not true. And so you got to keep your head up, and you need friends with you to do that. So he's going to have people, for other governors that have seen him lead. He is going to have people from Congress, including a whole bunch of moderates from rural districts that are going to explain what he's all about. But I also think it's helpful in governing, and that's one of the reasons that Vice President Harris pick Governor Walz, is that he has those relationships. He has that experience. Not only has been a soldier and a teacher, but he's also been a member of Congress. And there's always tensions for any White House, regardless of party, in dealing with Congress. And I see Tim Walz as that happy warrior who can work with Congress, something that both Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale did very well in their roles as vice president.
Yeah, you joked about, when people have babies in Minnesota, they bounce them on their knee and say, one day you can grow up to be vice president.
That's pretty much true. We've shown it again, and remember how close Governor Pawlenty was when John McCain, who I miss very much, by the way, Senator McCain, was picking a candidate. And, you know, Tim would have been great, but it wasn't. That wasn't the decision made at that day. But Minnesota has always played a role on the national stage. I think part of why that is that our state has rural and urban. It's a very strong metro area, very strong suburban area. But then we have really unbelievable businesses from Cirrus Jets to Hormel to Schwann's in greater Minnesota, to Arctic Cat and Polaris and DigiKey. I mean, it's kind of a lot of states don't have that. And we've got this strong farm economy. We're fourth in the country for ag exports, number one for turkeys, which I'm sure Walz will have to repeat on the national stage. But we also have something like 15, 16, 17 Fortune 500 companies. So I think with that strong workers, strong unions, I think it brings a sense of leadership and governing over a state that brings with it a lot of different economic strength, healthcare with Mayo and our medical device companies, and ingenuity in food and manufacturing. I think it's pretty cool background to go into the national politics and national stage.
One last thing, and then I'll let you go, because I know you got a lot of people that want to talk to you. You know, already the attacks come in from the other side of the aisle, from the Republican side. Congressman Tom Emmer from Minnesota, who, you know, at one point was going to be Speaker of the House, and then there was kind of a little tiff there, but he's been a very active supporter of former President Trump, including in St. Cloud when the former president visited here, and tweeted again today what some of his messaging there is, that calling calling Minnesota a mini California and putting that together as a very progressive ticket that he tried to do here, what Kamala Harris's home state has done. How is that message going to play against them across the wider range of the United States?
You know, Tom and I work together all the time, but I think the facts on this are going to be these. Minnesota has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, and that's because of our workers and businesses. But CNBC just voted us 6th in the country of all the states, all 50 states, to do business in. So whatever they want to do to try to characterize Tim Walz, you know, I wish those were the days when Donald Trump would simply welcome him to the ticket. Guess we're past those days. But I think the truth and how Minnesotans feel about him and what he is going to bring to a national ticket, I think that in the end is what's going to triumph.
Thank you so much for your time, U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar, and I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot more of you as this campaign goes, that we'll be seeing you alongside our Governor Walz at some of these events. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. Let's move on now to somebody who's been standing by here for a while in this flexible news day here, Fox 9's Corin Hoggard, who just landed in Philadelphia this morning. Well, he will be covering the Harris-Walz rally later today. That was the Harris blank rally. Now it's the Harris-Walz rally. Corin, you've been waiting patiently. Set the scene there for us.
Yeah, Rob, we actually left the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport at 7 a.m., headed here to Philly with no idea who the vice presidential candidate would be. And while we were on the plane, it happened. And in my row, I've mentioned earlier that everybody was asleep except for me, but I did hear the 3 women behind me discussing Walz as a candidate almost immediately. They were doing the same thing I was, which was monitoring social media and just kind of refreshing, trying to see who the candidate might be, and sure enough, it was the governor of Minnesota. So they had some positive reactions there, but we saw, as you've mentioned previously, that there were plenty of negative reactions from Republicans in Minnesota. But on our plane, at least in the radius that I could hear, it was nothing but positive and snoring. But we'll have that rally. This will be the first time that Governor Walz will appear with Kamala Harris as a ticket together. They, of course, appeared this March in St. Paul at an abortion clinic to mark their support, both of them supporting the rights of women to get abortions there. And that was the first time that we've seen either a vice president or a president going to an active abortion clinic. So that was a notable moment. But Tim Walz was right there with Kamala Harris, as well as some other Minnesota politicians. And so they do have some history together. One of the things that I read about why she chose him as her running mate was just kind of their rapport in the time that they had spent together as she was deciding who should be her vice presidential pick. And you know as well as anyone that Governor Walz has this kind of folksy approach that really works with, both rural and urban voters. And he's just kind of that affable guy who apparently won over the vice president as well as he did the voters of Minnesota the last 2 elections.
Well, yeah, Corin, as somebody who's at the Capitol, I feel like about the only time you see Governor Walz in a suit is at the Capitol. Anytime he leaves the Capitol, he's wearing jeans and a sport coat, or the last time I saw him, he was wearing a Carhartt jacket and pants, and so he does kind of have that, you've seen the memes about the big dad vibes and whatever. I mean, we're going to see him in a suit a lot more often, but I assume that you would expect that he's still going to be dressed in that same folksy way on the campaign trail.
Yeah, that big dad energy, I think, is what you're mentioning. I've seen it on Threads especially, and that thing just took over social media. The memes were things that reached younger voters. I know my daughter came and asked me if I'd ever met this guy and what he was like, because she was seeing it on TikTok and on Threads and other places. And And that may be one of the things that appealed to Kamala Harris, was just, even though he is about the same age as she is and has kind of this, grandfatherly or older fatherly look about him, is that he somehow had, through that quote-unquote big dad energy, reached a younger generation. We know that some of the large names on social media had supported him early on as the vice presidential pick. We saw David Hogg, we saw Beto O'Rourke, and we saw a lot of people early on when he was still quite the underdog, 28-1 odds at best. He was maybe 8th most likely to get the pick, yet he had that kind of support, and that may also be convincing when you're looking for a running mate.
All right. Thank you, Corin. I know you just landed. We'll let you get out of the airport now and get on with your day, because you got a busy day ahead covering this rally in which he will be formally introduced beyond social media. So we'll be checking for your reporting later on today. Thanks, Corin. Well, tomorrow, J.D. Vance, the Republican vice presidential candidate, will be visiting Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And this is the same day that Kamala Harris and Governor Walz will be also in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, as part of the kickoff campaign stops. This will be Vance's first visit to the battleground state since his nomination for vice president was announced. A short time ago, Vance did give his reaction to the Walz pick.
They make an interesting tag team because, of course, Tim Walz allowed rioters to burn down Minneapolis in the summer of 2020, and then the few who got caught, Kamala Harris helped bail them out of jail. So it is more instructive for what it says about Kamala Harris, that she doesn't care about the border, she doesn't care about crime, she doesn't care about American energy, and most importantly, she doesn't care about the Americans who have been made to suffer under those policies.
Well, Fox 9 will be in Eau Claire tomorrow and bring you live coverage of both campaign events on air and online. We will continue to follow this breaking news of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz being chosen as Kamala Harris's running mate. We'll be right back. If their ticket does win in November, Walz becomes the 3rd Minnesotan to serve as VP. We'll have more on that as well when we return. We continue to follow this breaking news all morning long here. Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty, after being on the short list here for the last couple of weeks and then getting on the shorter of the short list the last few days, now the selection by Kamala Harris to be her running mate on the Democratic ticket. We are joined now by Brian McClung, the former chief of staff for former Governor Tim Pawlenty, a Republican, and prior to that, a Republican political operative here. Brian, your former boss gave you some grief here. He was talking about the internal campaigning for these vice presidential shortlisters. He's like, hey, maybe if Brian had done a better job, I'd have been the VP candidate. I'm glad to see you guys can still give each other a hard time.
You know, he's just upset because I beat him the last time we played golf. So I think that's what Governor Pawlenty's getting at now. But yeah, I think, you know, it's fair to say I'm probably Minnesota's premier expert when it comes to Tim's in the vice presidential running. Of course, with Tim Pawlenty, my old boss, he was vetted for the #2 slot in both 2008 with John McCain and in 2012 with Mitt Romney. Sometimes people forget that second go around, but Governor Pawlenty was on the very final short list that time as well. And then, of course, here today, we have another Tim Walz, getting the nod. So Minnesota, you know, is known for being in the running. We have actually had, you know, as you know, 2 previous Democrat vice presidents in Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale. So keep in mind, if Harris and Walz were to win this November, then Minnesota would have produced 3 out of the last 6 Democratic vice presidents. So that's a bit of history. But, you know, Minnesota's known as a state with good governance on both the left and the right. So no surprise that we have a lot of folks from our home state that are in this conversation.
As you've been following these Veep stakes, as we like to call them, you know, my sense was when he was initially put on the short list, the sense was by a lot of observers is that he was maybe on the longer version of the short list, and then as time went on, he moved up the rankings, and it seemed like, you know, a lot of attention paid to Mark Kelly in Arizona, being a border state and a former astronaut, and certainly Governor Shapiro, Governor Beshear being, you know, in a kind of a mid-South state. Why do you think at the end Harris picked Walz above them?
You know, I think there are probably a couple of key factors. First of all, in Governor Walz, you have a politician who, you know, has kind of a moderate background, who projects as somebody who is mainstream as kind of your frumpled uncle and, you know, that Midwestern dad persona. So with his background as a high school teacher, as a football coach, as a former member of the National Guard, he's kind of a little bit more kind of that centrist feel, but his governing style and the record that he compiled as governor, particularly in these past 2 years where he's had that all Democratic trifecta at the state capitol, he has been able to go through a long checklist of progressive goals. And so he can talk about, you know, free lunch and breakfast for school kids, or protecting reproductive rights, or, you know, other kind of key progressive and left items. And that was different. You know, the other finalists were maybe more pure moderates, pure centrists. And I think Vice President Harris, that first thing you can do when you pick your VP is do no harm. And Walz is in that do no harm. He doesn't upset different parts of the Democratic base. They're going to need everybody rowing together. And I think that probably was the deciding point when they got down to it.
How do you think Governor Walz will be then in a, you know, we assume that there's going to be a vice presidential debate. Walz versus J.D. Vance. Both have kind of some similar stories of coming out of the heartland or rural areas. How do you think that matchup is going to play out?
Well, yes, you've got Ohio versus Minnesota. It's a Big Ten matchup in the #2 spot. I think it's going to be a really interesting debate, and I hope that it happens. I think the whole kind of debate structure is on shaky ground right now, and so it's unclear if we're going to get another presidential debate. You know, probably unclear if we'll end up with a vice presidential debate. But I think you have this kind of Midwestern styles in Governor Walz as older, more seasoned. You know, he's 60 years old. He's been around 12 years in Congress and then 6 years as governor, versus J.D. Vance, who has just served 2 years as a U.S. Senator, a relative newcomer, but somebody who is obviously very smart, knows what he wants to say, is able to deliver a message. So I think that would be a fun debate. And I think, you know, for Midwesterners, that would be kind of a fun time for us to be observers of politics.
One last question, and we got to make this quick because Keith Marler is standing by to tell us about how beautiful the weather is going to be all week. And this is, you know, you worked with Governor Tim Pawlenty, you longtime GOP, I guess, operative. The point here is that what Governor Pawlenty said, we call them the undecided voters. He referred to them as the persuadables. Is this a ticket? Because obviously that's the target, the folks who are maybe the moderate Republicans that they see that have a distaste for another Trump presidency. Is this a ticket that can actually get after that target?
Well, I think for starters, that doing that in Western Wisconsin, where Tim Walz is very well known, you know, Western Wisconsin, fastest growing part of their state. In your media market here. And so I think Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, having somebody who understands and can speak to the concerns, and particularly economic concerns, of those swing voters is really important. Ultimately, though, you know, the vice presidential pick doesn't tend to sway or decide the election. It is around the margins, but this election looks like it's going to be very close in those key 6 or 7 battleground states. So I think they are hopeful that, especially in that blue wall of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they're really hoping that Governor Walz can be a very strong surrogate for them.
Brian McClung, former chief of staff to former Governor Tim Pawlenty, who we just had on a little bit ago. Brian, thank you. He's been waiting on Zoom for about an hour to get in here, and then he was, you know, his spot taken by his former boss. So thanks for joining us today.
It's tough.
All right.
It's tough. That Pawlenty, he never lets it go.
No, he doesn't. Thank you so much. And somebody else who's been waiting for a long time patiently is Mr. Keith Marler over here. Keith, I know we had a lot of disruptive weather rolling through last night, a lot of it too, and it kind of kept going. And now it's the calm after those storms, isn't it?
It's beautiful outside. And this is what makes days like today, where news is such a big topic, it's just piece of cake in our little world. And there's nothing to talk about for us, which is awesome, because all of our active weather yesterday, we picked up 1 inch or 1.4 inches of rain at the airport. Our North Metro up the 94 corridor picked up anywhere from 1 to 3+ inches of rain. That's all gone. It got out of here no problem over the course of last night, leaving us with tornado reports across southern Minnesota along and south of Highway 14. You can go to our website or go on to the Fox 9 app. Obviously, a lot of news there for the day-to-day, too, but also the latest on those tornado reports from yesterday evening. The National Weather Service going out today and will confirm the existence of those tornadoes based on social media reports, and also they will determine the strength of those tornadoes based on the damage reports. We'll have the latest on that as those reports are issued through the day-to-day, if they're issued through the day-to-day. Sometimes it takes them a couple of days to get down there and assess all the damage. It usually does take a couple of days to get those through. Upper 60s to lower 70s out the door right now. 70 in Minnetonka, 70 in Robbinsdale, 70 in Edina, 70 in Eagan. Very popular number. Again, maybe you've probably, I'm assuming, already thrown your windows open at home because it's an open window day top to bottom. Upper 60s and lower 70s for temperatures. But it's not just the temperature, because we've been living in such a humid environment for the past 2 weeks. It's been about the dew point. And dew points in the 50s are an absolute measurement of the moisture in the atmosphere, and dew points in the 50s in the summer are golden. It is glorious out there. They're going to remain in the 50s or 40s or 30s. That's a dry atmosphere all week. Dew points in the low 60s, summer comfort. It's all very pleasant for us through the week. There goes yesterday's rain out the door for the overnight hours. This is a 12-hour satellite and radar loop, leaving us with plenty of sunshine for the day, a few fair weather clouds toward the evening hours. 76 degrees for your high today. Gorgeous sunshine, quiet, very comfortable with a northeastern breeze. Overnight tonight, 50s. Keep the windows open if you'd like. Comfortably cool to borderline crisp up north. A few upper 40s popping near the Canadian border. Tomorrow, partly sunny sky in the afternoon, a high of 75. A weak impulse rides through the state from the northwest. We'll pop a few isolated showers. We're measuring it in hundredths of an inch. Nothing at all like yesterday. Most of us will actually avoid drips here and there for the end of the day. It wraps up Wednesday night, early Thursday morning with a couple of clouds, then pleasant, mostly sunny, 73. You see what's happening here? Glorious, comfortable weather. Friday, maybe a drip up north Friday or a sprinkle for folks heading up north for the weekend. Sunshine over the weekend, mid to upper 70s. Take us into the early days of next week. This is the golden age of weather. Back at us with very comfortable weather on the 7-day forecast with only minor blips ahead.
Oh, we can give the air conditioner a break.
Indeed we can. It's glorious.
I love that. Thank you so much, Keith.
Yeah.
All right, our continuing coverage of today's breaking news. Governor Tim Walz on the Harris ticket. Harris Walz now. We'll continue after this. We'll be right back. Our continuing coverage of breaking news today, Vice President Kamala Harris choosing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is her running mate for this upcoming election here, really energizing the political race even more here for the White House over the last few weeks. Fox 9's Paul Bloom joining us live in the newsroom with more on this selection and certainly more of the reaction to it. Paul.
Yeah, Rob, good morning to you. There are going to be lots of attacks directed at Governor Walz for his leadership in the aftermath of George Floyd. Of course, we already heard it today from the Republican vice presidential hopeful, J.D. Vance, on his aircraft earlier. Minneapolis burning for several days before the National Guard was finally deployed in 2020. Many, of course, blaming Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey at the time for their leadership in those dark, dark days. Remember, at the height of the pandemic, local Democrats now coming to the defense of Governor Walz, and that includes our Attorney General, Keith Ellison. In the last hour or so, I spoke to the Attorney General by phone. He's currently out of town, but I asked him flat out about Walz's leadership at the biggest moment of Walz's career when protests exploded on the streets of Minneapolis.
Derek Chauvin is the one who caused the civil disturbance because he murdered George Floyd. Other people will try to lay blame in all kinds of directions. but he stepped up. He ordered the National Guard. The National Guard restored order, and as AG, I think he did an excellent job. So I'm very proud and pleased with the work that he did. That's one of the reasons he's a very smart pick, because he has tremendous upside, and and like he is an authentic, genuine human being, and people are going to just relate to him, and because he's a real guy. He is a dad. He is a coach. He's monitored the lunchroom, at the high school he taught at.
I mean, he's monitored the lunchroom at a high school, public high school. Can't imagine that, but certainly might set him up for some success in Washington, D.C. Should the election fall that way, potentially. Correct, Rob? Who knows? But as we talk about here, Keith Ellison and Governor Walz actually came to politics around the same time. They both ran for Congress 18 years ago in the same cycle, coming through the whole Camp Wellstone, if you will, at the time, the DFL effort to put Democrats in office in the aftermath of Paul Wellstone's rise to prominence, and then, of course, his tragic death. They are friends. He now believes that Kamala Harris has made a great decision in choosing Tim Walz, that he's relatable, he's father-like, he's had the experience. He really singled out Governor Walz's work as a leader within the National Guard. He's a veteran that can be sent to Washington, D.C. So Keith Ellison excited about this. Obviously, Democrats, again, are going to have to defend him on his leadership in the state, particularly as it relates to Minneapolis at the height of the George Floyd murder and the subsequent protests, Rob. But you heard there from Keith Ellison on the road that Keith Ellison has his back and believes Walz did everything he could, putting all the blame for what happened over those dark, dark days at the feet of Derek Chauvin.
Yeah, and that's certainly going to be a big part of the campaigns here and the conversation here going forward. Former President Trump brought that up at his rally in St. Cloud a week and a half ago. So you know that that's going to continue to be a big focus of maybe attacks, of explanations on both sides here.
And then, of course, the tweet from Kamala Harris talking about perhaps if you had some money to donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, the protesters that were being picked up off the streets of Minneapolis at that time. They this storyline kind of puts Minneapolis at the forefront of those attacks going forward. So it'll be fascinating to watch. But Keith Ellison says you can send Tim Walz down to the border in Arizona. You can send him to Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and that voters will relate to him. And we'll just have to see. Of course, this first campaign rally coming up tonight in Philadelphia, right in the backyard of the governor of Pennsylvania, who she decided not to go with, Governor Shapiro. So it'll all be interesting to watch play out in the coming days.
All right, thank you, Paul Bloom, live in the newsroom. Minnesota Democrats, of course, throwing their support behind Governor Tim Walz and the Harris ticket. Joining us now live via Zoom is Minnesota's DFL chair, Ken Martin. Ken, when did you start getting the sense that Tim Walz was moving up that short list to the even shorter short list? Did you have any sense over the past couple of weeks that things were changing and getting him into this final selection position?
Well, it certainly had seemed over the last week, given the amount of appearances Governor Walz was making on TV stations and media throughout the country, and of course the buzz that generated from that he was going to be in consideration. And he should be in consideration, given his record of accomplishment in this state, what he's been able to do for Minnesotans. It's not a surprise that Tim Walz was chosen. He brings a lot to the ticket, and of course, all Minnesotans, regardless of political party, should be proud. We have a great tradition of sending some great national figures to Washington, D.C. Of course, we've had two vice presidents before, and Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Vice President Walter Mondale, and Tim Walz will follow in their giant shoes and be a great leader as the next Vice President of the United States.
And how do you see this playing out during the campaign? What we were just talking about is, there's a lot of kind of attacks already. We've heard them before, saying that Governor Walz stood by while the Minneapolis was burning in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the protests that followed. The governor's explained, well, no, I activated the National Guard, not former President Trump. It was the first full activation in either decades or ever. But how do you see this playing out? How much explanation is Governor Tim Walz going to be forced to do about the timeline of what happened here?
Well, I think the facts will speak for themselves. Governor Walz was the one who mobilized the National Guard, the largest mobilization of the National Guard since World War II here in Minnesota. And while he was doing that and trying to actually restore law and order here in the Twin Cities, Donald Trump was tweeting out and doing nothing, actually tweeting out and encouraging people to be lawlessness, to take the law into their own hands. You know, he didn't do anything to actually help during one of the most unsettling periods of our state's history. It was Governor Walz who actually brought our communities together and found a path forward, and part of that was restoring law and order by mobilizing the National Guard. And so if that's the only line of attack that they can land on Governor Walz, they're going to have a hard time winning this race here in November.
How do you think Governor Walz matches up against Vice Presidential nominee J.D. Vance, both on the campaign trail and in what we presume will be an upcoming VP debate?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons he was chosen. One, Governor Walz is from a small town in rural Nebraska. He graduated with 25 kids in his class, as he likes to joke. Half of them were his cousins. He moved then to Mankato, Minnesota, where he, small town in southern Minnesota, where he taught and met his wife, and for years was not only a teacher, but a football coach. He's a hunter. He's a gun owner. He does well in greater Minnesota, in the rural parts of our state. And most importantly, Governor Walz can talk about our values, both American values, but also our party's values in very common sense ways with a Midwestern sensibility and a folksiness that I think it will be a great contrast to J.D. Vance, who, even though he's from Appalachia, completely forgot his roots, completely forgot his upbringing. As he went to Yale and went to work for a big Wall Street hedge firm after that, the reality is J.D. Vance has completely abdicated any responsibility he had back to small town rural America and how he's chosen to live his life. Most importantly is their records. J.D. Vance has done nothing of accomplishment of note that we can point to during his time in the U.S. Senate, whereas Governor Walz is probably one of the most accomplished governors in our nation during this period. His record of success is long, as we know here in Minnesota, and you couple that with Kamala Harris's record as vice president and President Biden's record these last 3 years, we have a lot to talk to. I'm confident we're going to win this election, and this was a great choice by Vice President Harris.
Well, what does this mean for the Minnesota DFL and for the state this November? Obviously, it was a pretty tight race when former President Trump ran against Hillary Clinton. The margin broadened a little bit against President Biden. You know, there were questions about whether this was approaching a toss-up or battleground state, getting purple. What do you think this does?
Well, Rob, look, I mean, as you know, you've known me a long time. I've been chair for 14 years. We haven't lost a statewide election since I've been chair, and we're not going to start now. But I also never get too overly confident, which is why we win, because we run like we're 20 points behind, even if we're 20 points ahead. We're not going to take anything for granted. Of course, the selection of Governor Walz as the vice presidential nominee in our party helps us for sure. I would expect more resources in this state, but this is still a battleground. And I think what's critical to note is the easiest and surest path still for Kamala Harris to win the presidency goes through the blue wall states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. And when she and Tim Walz win all 4 of those states, that's game, set, and match, and they'll be the next president and vice president of the United States. So we're going to do our part here in Minnesota to make sure we deliver our 10 electoral votes for the Harris-Walz ticket. And we couldn't be more excited to send our great governor off to Washington to continue his public service and to take a little bit of this Minnesota miracle all around the nation.
All right. Ken Martin, thank you for taking time on this very busy morning for all of us. It's Ken Martin, chair of the Minnesota DFL. Our continuing coverage here of this newly announced ticket of Harris-Walz continues when we come back. Welcome back to Fox 9 as we continue with our breaking news coverage of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz being named the vice presidential partner to current Vice President Kamala Harris on their Democratic ticket for the White House. Alex Kendall and Kelly O'Connell earlier today were able to speak with Minnesota House Speaker Representative Melissa Hortman. Here's a bit of what she had to say about Governor Walz being chosen as Harris's VP pick.
I'm not surprised. When you looked at the pool, it seemed that Governor Walz was in a very good position relative to the other candidates. I think it's hard for the vice president to pick a U.S. senator at this point. And then when you look at what Tim Walz has accomplished as governor and the kind of person that he is, it's just a great fit for her.
As far as, kind of putting Minnesota on the map, if you will, you hear that term getting thrown around a lot. How do you think this will play come the election and obviously the election cycle and the campaigning as we are now less than 100 days to go until November?
What I think people will like the most about Tim Walz on the national stage is that he's a happy and upbeat person, and he sees the best in people and situations. And I think people prefer a positive, upbeat approach, people who smile and laugh leading them, as opposed to people who are kind of snarky and kind of dark.
So that mentioning his positive approach is appealing. What is it, you know him personally. Is there something about him that maybe people don't know or will learn in the coming months about him that may surprise people out there who are just getting to know Governor Walz?
Well, I think that the dad memes have captured it really well. He does have that dad energy of like, hey, we're in this together. Let's get the job done. You can do it. We can do it. But also, like, this is serious work, and we're going to do this work together. We take our work seriously. The work that we have to do for Minnesotans is important. They're always front and center in the things that we're thinking about doing. And how will the policies that we're talking about change ordinary people's lives on a day-to-day basis, both short-term and long-term? So he's got that dad attitude and that dad pragmatic leadership.
That was Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman speaking to us earlier today. Again, this new team for the Democrats will be appearing later today at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania. Again, our Corin Hoggart is there to cover that. But now Fox's Doug Luzader has a look at the impact that this new ticket will have on the national scene.
This report is not a complete surprise, with Governor Tim Walz seen as gaining some momentum recently among those on Kamala Harris's short list.
He said he'd win Minnesota. He will lose again, and this is where it ends. It ends in the blue walls.
He's had former President Trump in his sights for weeks, and now Minnesota Governor Tim Walz is the pick. The Associated Press and others reporting the development. By all indications, Vice President Kamala Harris waited until the last minute to make her decision, something many Democrats saw coming.
What I've seen from the reporting and heard from folks in D.C. is that Tim Walz just warms your heart, and that the vetting team really enjoyed being with him. And he is responsible for a large amount of the vibes that are going on right now in the Kamala camp.
Walz is a progressive governor and labor union favorite who could also help Democrats protect Minnesota from any inroads from the Trump campaign. He appears to have narrowly edged out Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who, as a moderate, could have helped balance the ticket ideologically and perhaps delivered a key swing state in the process. Harris and her new running mate will now hit the road, traveling to 7 swing states in 5 days. The Trump campaign, meantime, is dispatching vice presidential nominee J.D. Vance to essentially shadow the new Democratic team in coming days to counter their pitch. And in the wake of a massive sell-off on Wall Street yesterday, expect a renewed focus on the economy. And that's an issue that resonates in the upper Midwest, as the Harris campaign no doubt hopes that Governor Walz will help them win over voters there. In Washington, Doug Luzader, Fox News.
Yeah, and that's been a big part of the messaging the last couple of days about the big market sell-off and recovery, and that playing a lot into it as well. We had a big weather sell-off last night. with a lot of stuff. I shouldn't laugh about it because there was some really life-threatening weather out there, and now it's we're assessing the damage today under very, very calm skies.
Exactly. National Weather Service sending out the teams across southern Minnesota today. It sometimes takes them a couple of days to go and assess all the tornado reports that came through. We had 4 major clusters in southern Minnesota along and south of Highway 14, and the National Weather Service will assess that. It'll take them a couple of days to get all that information back. We'll have the latest this evening on what has been found today, but it might take a couple of days to get all that. We picked up about an inch, a little over an inch of rain on the south side of town, 1.4 inches officially at the airport, but 2 inches in Maple Grove, 3 inches in Coon Rapids, 3 inches near Rogers, 3 inches up in Alexandria from some of those rainfalls from yesterday. All of that's gone, leaving us with blue sky, sunshine, and yeah, 72 degrees over a 53 dew point. That is amazing, and we're going to keep that amazing alive for several days once again. All of the heat and, more importantly, all of the tropical to borderline oppressive style humidity is gone. Lower humidity today. Enjoy the windows open and keep them open tonight at 55 or 58 for your overnight low. Mild tomorrow, partly sunny. A weak impulse still could throw down an attempted drip tomorrow, but it's nothing like yesterday. In fact, nothing like real rain. Just some anemic showers that pay a visit late in the day, especially up north, and the rest of us get them toward the evening or overnight. That'll fall apart. Then back to pleasant sunshine on Thursday at 73. A cooler day on Friday, still 71. A lot of the state only in the 60s on Friday. Kind of this early preview of some fallish style weather. Then bouncing back up. Sunshine, mid to upper 70s from the weekend and into the early days of next week. Rob?
It's like we had August weather in late July. And now we're
always get this in August.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us on our extended coverage. Sherry's up next. The news continues on Fox Local on your smart TV and at 5.
What, you know, as far